officially call the meeting to order. I'm Vinnie Piccirilli, the chair. We'll go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Councilor Palumba, I'm the vice chair.
Elliot Freeman, with Joe.
Turn on your microphones.
Mike Leah, Director of Athletics at the high school.
Pete Santoro, Director of Recreation, resident.
Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Olivia Thomas. I'm in a butter over on Marion Road.
Ann Cordy, Catherine Road, a butter.
Steve Magoon, Community Development Planning Assistant Town Manager.
So we have just a couple of things. We have Joanne Hogan, who's our note taker, so I want to thank her for doing an amazing job trying to capture what we talk about in these sometimes freewheeling meetings. We also have cable TV. I want to thank them that they're recording it, so just so everybody knows when you speak that everything is being recorded. Just a couple of other things. I do want to say we had our Musto lighting demonstration last Thursday night on September 14th, just before the skies burst. So I really want to thank Glenn and the vendor and Peter and the DPW for organizing that. I think the public really appreciated the chance to see the lighting in action. We will talk about the lighting. We will revisit that at the next meeting on October 3rd, so we're not going to talk about lighting tonight. I do want to say, let the committee know that we did get 2 comments from the public, which I've distributed to you tonight. We appreciate the public writing to us, and we do take that very seriously when the committee reviews what we're doing here. Let's see, I think that we are ready to go to agenda item 2, which is the approval of the minutes from August 29th. So I've sent that around to anyone, and I will open it up to the floor if anybody has any questions, comments, additions, or deletions. And if there are none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Good. Very good. And again, I really do want to thank Joanne for the fabulous job that she's doing. So next is our unfinished business from August 29th. Further discussion and recommendation on the driveway. So we distributed by email to everybody a little map that Glenn had prepared as we had asked him to. We have them up on the board. That was sort of two options. One doing sort of the complete street sort of treatment on the driveway, which would be these. And an alternative would be to do it more as a traditional roadway with a sidewalk and a curb, which we figured we could sort of do it this way by maintaining the existing width of the road at 20 feet and using some of the grass on either side to put a sidewalk with a curb. I would like to sort of open up for discussion on the committee, your thoughts about these 2 things, and then after we sort of discuss it here, I will let the public make some comments before we come back and actually vote to make a decision. So, who wants to start on the committee?
Actually, I was wondering if Glenn would want to just review what you're proposing on this. More detail on this. I don't know if everybody can see it.
Yeah.
Review actually what you're proposing on the Safe Streets, including the...
Sure. I'll pop up for a real quick second, because it's really just a section between the 2 parking areas. This being Orchard Street, you come in, we're not really showing any change to the first parking lot when you come in. The change would really be all along the back of the bleachers for Victory Field, up to where the ticket booth is and where you entered Victory Field. Once you get past that, it would go back to a traditional, just we'd be improving the 13 parking spaces that exist here, blocking off the other parking spaces. And this is just very conceptual. Someone at the committee meeting last time asked, what are you talking about when you're talking about the complete streets concept? So just to give a little bit of flair here, you're talking about surface treatments that not pavement, maybe pavers, adding color. adding trees and planters, maybe benches, maybe tables, something to make it more like a plaza for shared use for pedestrians, bicyclists, and cars would be allowed to go through here, but the goal being to, warn people in cars that this is not just for cars. This is an open space, shared use, slow down. And a very big benefit, we're going to be talking about stormwater I think a little bit later, but one of the benefits to this is what we call right-of-way bioswales, where you're infiltrating stormwater along the edge of road through infiltration planters with trees, shrubs. You bring the water from the streets directly into these planters and you infiltrate it rather than send it into a storm drain system. So this whole section kind of becomes an extension of the roadway with pavers opening up a plaza. In this concept, we show the cannon moved more towards when you first come in. In this one, we left the cannon here. We've got the infiltration planters that I'm talking about here. This one shows some picnic tables. This doesn't. Ticket booth, it stays where it is on both. We keep the scoreboard where it is. Just try to use that space, extend the road in, and add some amenities to make it more of a multi-use-friendly space.
Okay, and I just do, if anybody in the public, we have some handouts if anybody wants them. Maybe Matt, I'll ask Matt if he can maybe pass them around to the audience. That might be helpful. Okay, so does that sort of answer your question in a nutshell, or do you want?
Well, I have more questions, but maybe you other thoughts. Well, I have several more questions, I think. Are you doing now?
Well, you can ask them now, yeah.
Okay. Glenn, you said you pretty much leave the entrance to the, on Orchard Street alone, or what would we do there? You have at the entranceway, you have these two deck downs that are not doing anything. Anyway, are you going to be proposing stuff at the entranceway as well?
Possibly it's in the landscaping, but that would
No, I understand.
That wouldn't be part of that complete street.
No, I understand that, but you essentially, is there going to be a sign, or more landscaping, or?
We can. We haven't shown anything at this point, but.
I do. If I could just maybe interrupt. If you look at the map, there is, you talked about Orchard Street is here. It does show sort of a sidewalk, a walkway here along the front end of those parking spaces. So one of the things you asked last meeting is, if people are on Orchard Street, how do they walk in here without walking through the middle of the driveway? So if we were to add a sidewalk here, people could walk in on Orchard Street down the sideway here rather than walking down the middle of the driveway. So that could be one alternative. Again, as long as everybody remembers, these are conceptual designs, these aren't construction designs.
Well, I think that would be useful, but I think also if you look at the entranceway, if you're facing the park, on the right-hand side, you can see the people have put in a desire line on their path, and there's no, I think you have to respond to that or deal with it, do something with it, digital landscaping. You can see that's how people are coming from the parking lot, I'm sorry, from DPW, and they go right by the three, what is it, utility.
Electrical box.
Electrical
Oh, I
box.
think you're talking about here,
Yeah.
on this side.
I think on both sides, I would hope that we would be able to do something at the entranceway that's a little more, nothing fancy, nothing substantial, but do something that says it's an entrance to an interesting facility. And I think the same thing on the other end, take Marion Road, where you have some rusting stanchions that I think they have to remain unless you have a gate, but I think we should probably have some sort of treatment back there. A lot of people come from Marion Street walking into the area. So all I'm saying is at some point I think we should do more with this entry. I agree with what you did here. I have no problem with that. Just a little more
Substance to the entrance.
something, a little more oomph. I think that's the term you guys use technically. Also, in terms of the safe streets, on the edges from the, I know this is conceptual, but what would you thinking of when you get from the edge of the safe streets to the track and field? What's the edge to that? How are you dealing with between this
Yeah, there's still,
this detail? What
Right now,
are you thinking about there?
right now it just transitions into the grass and then the track. And whether there's a fence between, along the edge of the track hasn't really been, okay, we're talking about no netting, we're trying to eliminate fencing, so whether there's a low chain link fence along the track or no fence, right, that paver probably would have a granite or a concrete curb edge holding in the pavers, and then it would transition to either some sidewalk, additional edge, or just going into the grass. But since the whole thing is kind of a pedestrian plaza, it would transition to the grass is all I'm thinking. You don't have a lot of space between the track and what you're showing here.
And going the other way between your expanded, which I think is great, between this thing and the
That's
bleachers.
going
How do
right
you
up to
deal
the
with that
fence.
edge?
That's going right up to the fence right now, what we're
Up to
showing,
the,
the bleacher fence.
okay. And is the plaza area raised, or 9 inches, the face 12 inches, whatever?
A little, just slightly, but you create that 6 to, could be as much as a foot, depending on what you make that transition.
And then you go to the kind of material that you're thinking of, what are the pavers? What types of options do you have for pavers? Permeable, set in sand, or what do you think would be?
That's something we work out when we're doing detailed design with DPW, because they're gonna have to deal with the maintenance of this thing, they're gonna have to do the plowing, so I'm not gonna throw out exactly what we need to make. But yes, permeable pavers would be desirable from a stormwater standpoint, we're gonna talk about. I think that's where the DPW needs to really get involved in that discussion.
Okay. All set, Tony?
I'll pass, I'll come back.
Did anybody else have any, Mike?
Yeah, I'll weigh in for a second. I'm very open to the concept of a raised and different roadway going in there. I think for safety purposes, I think it'll slow cars going through that area right now. I've always been worried about that area from a safety point of view. I think when you have games there with an awful lot of people leaving the game, and at the same time cars exiting, many of our football officials and coaches and other people park in this area way back, and their entryway very often is driving out of the roadway there while people are exiting the game. So it's just always been a safety concern with me, and I'm just going to keep it up as a safety concern of this. It seems like a nice improvement in terms of slowing people down, but I'm worried about cars and pedestrians inches away.
Okay, Tony?
Yeah, thank you for doing this. It's helpful to see something, an example of what we were talking about last time at the end of the meeting. Is there an end? You said that the treatment goes right into the grass on the left-hand side before or is there some sort of curbing?
There would have to be curbing depending on what, you see things like this where they actually just do stamped concrete and do a color. In that case, you wouldn't get any penetration. If you did that, you wouldn't need edge treatment. But if you went with some type of paver, whether it's an infiltrating paver or just a concrete.
Could you explain what a paver is?
It's like a brick, a brick, you just brick pavers and you put them down, but it's not, it's actually precast concrete brick material. You see them sometimes plazas, at outdoor malls, things like that.
Is there any?
I was just going to say, the edge treatment though is flush. It's not a raised curve.
Right,
It's a
right,
flush.
right. Would there be any value to taking one or two of the elements of the middle and putting them on each side, or at least on the front, to sort of give it some oomph?
Elements from the middle?
From this, elements of pieces that you use in here. Whatever it happens to be, and put some of it over here. Is a way of giving it a little continuity and also this.
That's already common, like Elliot was talking about there's a sidewalk that comes across, not everybody comes into the park either. So, just coming across, you could use the same treatment to kind of pick up on what we're doing inside the park along the driveway to identify that crosswalk coming in too, on both sides really.
And then your experience with these, and I was just thinking what Mike was saying, while it slows traffic down, is it considered safer because the traffic's slower, or do the cars have I'm just thinking of people walking and cars trying to move at the same time. Is there some problem with that?
What's really slowing the cars down, I mean, yeah, they get that initial bump, but when you're adding infrastructure,
Yeah.
like planters and trees and benches and seats, and you drive in and you see this infrastructure that's there for people, that's what's really, it's becoming, it's a sense of place when you get there and you're like, oh, there's something different here. It's not a street. I'm not driving through here the same way. I'm seeing all these elements and I'm aware more that there's something more than just a vehicle passage. That's really,
That's what slows things down.
That's right.
And I appreciate that, and that's what I think that's great, and what we're gonna eventually do, I think, but I just wanna be careful that pedestrians and bicyclists don't think there's no cars there. You know, because there are 13, we reduce the number of parking spaces, not reduce them. We decided not to put the 4 dirt ones in, but to reclaim that for open space. But there are still a number of parking spaces that are used by parents and by officials and by others. And so I'm concerned about I'm concerned about making it clear to people who want to use it as a plaza, that we understand that there's also cars there.
it's
So that there's-
interesting that even while we were standing there taking some measurements to see what we could actually work, within 10 minutes, a group of about 10 kids just came walking down the middle of there's no way they could have been on the sidewalk. They wouldn't have used a sidewalk because there was a group of them. And most of the people that come from the school, they come down Orchard and they either cut across the field or they come in the entrance and they walk as a group right down the center of the road, which is the opposite of what you're talking about. Because you're talking about once the people are in there, are they aware that the car
Because there's cars
And
there.
right now they are because it is a driveway.
Right.
So
So, is there anything you can do to make them aware that this is a place for them to sit and also to walk, but there's also going to be a car
in my
coming?
case, I think it's really just knowing,
Knowing the area.
you come and you've been there before, so you know that cars are going to be coming in.
Okay,
Signage,
signage might help.
Okay, well, raise your hand, Steve. Okay.
I'll just, I guess, offer a couple other comments. I think the sketches that Glenn came up with are great. I think they capture the concept. I think, the only thing I'll add to what I said last time is I think that there are 2 opportunities this helps us with. One is that it takes a situation where pedestrians and bicyclists and everything else are mixing with cars on the street. So what I think what the suggestion is let's make this space where pedestrians and bicyclists are mixing with cars and make it not a street, but make it a shared space so that it's not perceived as just a place for cars where people are unfortunate enough to have to walk. The second thing I think that Glenn's sketches really bring out is it really creates an opportunity to create a really interesting and different place as part of Victory Field Complex. It really creates a place that's interesting and different, and I think people really appreciate, and we're really, come to love as a part of the complex and an interesting, different amenity space for it. So I'll just leave it there.
I love the designs. I think they're great, Glenn. I like the idea. I think, as Steve said, it enhances the area. It makes it more of that feel of kind of, instead of being bisected, just kind of going across. I agree that now we've always had cars and people and bikes and kids sharing the area, and it's worked. I think this will just make it that much better. I think that people get the hang of it, as they do with Downtown Crossing or Harvard Square or wherever else they do. And, I think it's nice. It'll be a nice improvement, and I think it will be safer than it is now, although safety hasn't been a tremendous issue. But I think it's great.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm going to start calling you the miracle guy. I think you developed a very nice picture, and it's very creative. And again, 3 years ago, we had talked about speed bumps on either side, and I like the idea of having a raised area. I think some of the things I don't think it's practical. I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the map, and I'm looking at what it is now and what it used to be, and I don't see room for that. I think it would be very disrespectful and kind of embarrassing that all of a sudden we'd move that cannon after putting it there 6 years ago. The cannon, if the only other thing we would do is take away the fence. I'm looking where the trees would be. There is a scoreboard there. The other thing is, we have a situation with the elevator that needs to be dealt with. And unless they're going to deal with it the whole time, you can't start, moving things, in my opinion, putting trees up and so on and so forth, until you figure out what to do with that room. That's a room right off the elevator, because the state could come in and say, we need to have handicap accessibility. So I think that whole piece, and I don't want to be Peter down. I like the idea of a raised place. I think it's beautiful. I like the red and so on and so forth. I am just tremendously opposed to moving the cannon. It's kind of embarrassing to me. It takes away. We worked very hard 6 years ago, and the cannon was part of the entryway. That's the formal entry. I like the red. I like how it is. I don't know if we have enough room for the curbs. I'm just curious. The one thing that makes it nervous when somebody says we're not going to put a fence between the road and the track, and I'm saying, are you kidding me? On a dark night and somebody's walking the track and you have no separation with a small fence, I would never take that. So I think it's a tiny area. I like the raised fence, raised area, but I really think we can't do this in piecemeal. Everybody says, oh, it's going to be phase 3 and we'll deal with the elevator and the room there. But moving that cannon really kind of gets my back of my hairs and my neck up. But other than that, and then additionally, you're taking away parking. I keep on saying it, and I know what the vote was, 6-3. I'd like somebody to join me on a Sunday or Saturday where it's bedlam down there. And so those are my comments. So, and I like if we could raise it and do something, but not moving the cannon and not blocking the scoreboard, and then figuring out that area around the elevator. I don't think we could really make a final decision until we know what we're going to do with those type of things. Thank you.
The bottom concept does leave the cannon in place.
And so where's the scoreboard? It looks like the tree's in front of the scoreboard.
Possibly slightly, yeah, it's right. I think it's kind of between those two trees, but they might have to move slightly. Again, this was a very quick concept just to give everybody the feel, the flavor of the.
No, I understand. That's why I called you the Miracle Man. I mean, you're great.
Steve
You're
was
great
involved,
at what you do.
involved in this. So
I know.
Steve gets some credit.
Well, Steve is wonderful. I knew with that meeting. But, no, I know. And I appreciate seeing it, but I got to make those initial comments, so thank you.
I was just going to comment, Pete, I think your concerns all could be accommodated with this concept. I mean, if the concern is don't move the cannon, okay, we don't have to move the cannon. Don't block the scoreboard, clearly we don't want to block the scoreboard, so make sure that any amenities you put in don't block the scoreboard. In terms of the elevator, the footprint of the elevator is accommodated on these plans. If we decide we're going to change that, obviously we'll need to deal with that and change that. I don't think any of those preclude either of these concepts that Glenn drew. And in terms of parking, obviously it was the decision that was made last time we met. So, this isn't taking away any more parking than was already decided to take away.
And I understand that, Steve, and I agree with you. I mean, but one of the things, and again, getting back to the elevator, some of the places that have an elevator, they, say we replace the elevator, because the elevator can't be fixed. Say we replace the elevator, some plans are having a lift, so they have a ramp, and one of the discussions was having the ramp behind it. That's what I'm worried about. Not saying that would be the case, but I just think we have to think about that. That's all.
If I could just say one thing about the elevator. So there's an elevator shaft, an elevator machine room. The accessibility is not to the stands, it's to the press box.
Correct.
So the idea we're going to have ramps zigzagging ramps all the way up to the press box to get people with a wheelchair up there is not gonna work. So let's, you know, I don't want to say we can't do this design because the elevator is broken. The elevator will be fixed. You know, what it's gonna take to fix it, you know, but there's space there. There's an existing machinery room, and there's an existing elevator and existing shaft. If it's busted, it needs to be replaced, it'll be replaced. But we're not gonna build another building there just to put an elevator to get people up to the press box. And we're not gonna build a series of ramps to get people up to the press box because it will look like a ziggurat or something.
No.
So I think, you know, we need to be realistic. We have a building there for an elevator, that's gonna remain. Nothing we're doing here is gonna impinge on that. It'll be worked around it. So whether it's, right now it's behind a chain link fence, you know, with grass, here it'll be, could either be open or it could be fenced in, it doesn't really matter. But I wanted us to focus as a committee on the concept of sort of keeping this as a shared space and formalizing it as a shared space instead of a roadway. So that's the decision point that we're making today. Lodia.
I agree with Peter that there's too much fencing around the cannon, but I disagree, Peter. I think the cannon would do well to be moved because I think it could be a dramatic feature of the entryway to Victory Field. When Glenn and Elliot are talking about doing something at the entrance, some of the stuff that I put out to the community in Chicago, they had, and I can't believe I'd say add 2 more poles, quite frankly, but they had this great archway as the entrance to this field. And this is our, and I don't want to say that and offend anybody in this room, but this is the primo field in terms of student athletics and all that. So you could do a big Victory Field kind of sign above, and you could have the cannon right there. And we need a really good plaque to explain what this cannon is about and why it's important and why it's sitting here. And I rented to several military fellows and they go, the wheels are wrong, this is wrong, but how come it's stuck behind 2 fences and we don't even know why it's here? So when Glenn talks about how you slow people down coming into something, if we have the cannon there, this archway, you know you're entering a new space. You know you're going into something. You have the cannon there. It's something you can walk to go look at. We can do it much more. I'm sorry you've gone through all this shifting of the cannon back and forth, and perhaps if we'd had a little more community discussion, we would have done it differently, but we're having it now, and so let's be open to any possibility, but I think it would be dramatic at the entrance, and some really fantastic big sign. Everything at eye level or car level doesn't cut it, but I think a huge kind of something that says you are coming into this primo space and you're lucky to be here kind of deal. It's a visual thing. Well, that's how I feel about it, guys. So I think that could go a long way to kind of getting the slowdown and all the kinds of things that we're talking about.
Okay. No more questions, or do you have another comment?
Yeah, I have no, either one works for me, and if the cannon stays there, that would be fine with me. And I think that one of the problems with this is that we can agree to the concept of a shared space. I mean, that's not so hard. I think we all agree that it's really when we get into the details, and I'm not sure. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of this is when we get into the details, and as we sort of come closer to move away from the athletic fields and so forth, and move now into sort of the amenities and the tree links. I mean, I think we need to try to be as specific as we can, but I don't know how we wrestle with that, but we'll have to wrestle with it at one point. But I support the concept of the shared space.
Right, and I don't, our initial decision is, just sort of the treatment, what treatment do we want? Once we get into the landscaping, keeping the cannon where it is, moving it, what the fences are going to look like, what trees are planted, that comes later, but I think we need to sort of nail down the big decision first. So, Elliot, and then I'll ask the favorite public comment.
I don't want to dwell too long on the cannon, but I think one of the things that's important about it is, I think in World War I you had about 115,000 American troops died, and there should be something talking about that. You had about 8 million or 9 million Allied military died in World War I. It is a significant number, and it was a horrifying war. Admittedly, World War II beat that.
Was worse.
In a big way, but it was, I think there should be some notice made of not only World War I, but also, I think it's a 75 millimeter, it's probably French, actually.
It's German.
Howitzer, and it should be noted. And I think, forgetting location for a moment from location, I think it's important to say what the hell it stands for, and there was a lot of guys who were in the military.
Yeah, Elliot, I agree with you. I've had several conversations with the 3 of the veterans people, and we're trying to get a sign there, so I'm in complete agreement. I mean, I had some major disagreements, as you could tell. I'm not always easy to get along with, but I had a major disagreement with the person who wanted to keep that fence there. I said, why do you need a double fence? You take away from that. And I agree with you 100%. There should be a nice formal plaque. My question is, because where do you move it if you move it? And that's the thing. If there's all, I mean, one of the things, and again, don't shoot me. One of the things 5-6 years ago, we said we're going to move the cannon where those nice apple trees, not apple trees, the nice corner trees are. That's the entryway. And everybody said, no, we can't cut down those trees. But that was the discussion. And, we didn't like, because that would be right at the entry. But
So let's not.
no, but anyway, thank you.
So let's, we don't need to decide, whether we're gonna keep the can where it is or whether we're gonna move it somewhere else. Let's, because that's a level of detail we can take up later. So again, the question is, if anybody in the public wants to speak about this, and really the concept is formalizing this driveway as a shared roadway through the certain treatments and stuff. And I'll recognize, just state your name and the street you live on, and I'll start with Russ and then Dick.
Russell Rico, Fayette Street here in Watertown. I really like this first sketch. I think it's great. I think the committee should approve it, with the exception that some minor tweaking has to be done here to satisfy needs. Simple as that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dick.
Dick O'Connor, 81 Channing Road. Those parking spaces that aren't really supposed to be parking spaces, I notice on both of those plans, they've been planted out. Now I wonder, is that in accordance with the committee's decision the last time to leave the parking configuration as it is?
Yes.
But if you're planting them out, they're not available for parking.
So we voted 6-3 last time to.
Not to disturb them, to leave them as it is.
Not to formalize the 4 informal parking spaces on the dirt between the trees. So that's what, so these 2 drawings reflect what the committee voted.
And on the, I want to comment on the fence. I think we need a fence there. It discourages some people from bringing their dogs inside the field. And it discourages some bicycle riders from riding their bicycles on it. So I think we need a fence around the field. The cannon, I mean, the field is dedicated not just to those people who died in World War I, but to all the local people who fought. So it's not just a matter of, it's just not just a matter of the dead, but the people who were active in that. And my research indicates that the cannon was given to the town by the War Department in 1927. I don't know if it was bought, because a lot of towns got cannons. Supposedly it's a captured German cannon from World War I.
Thank you.
Libby Shaw, Templeton Parkway and Trees for Watertown. So I wanted just to talk about trees. In particular, it's not entirely clear to me, Glenn, whether these plans preserve the oaks that are down near the parking lot area by the tennis courts or other trees. I've heard people talk about trees as amenities. I would really like to correct that concept. Trees are not furniture, trees are not embellishments. Trees provide important ecological services. Big trees provide really important services that small replacement trees will not be able to provide for years and years. Those oak trees are in really good shape right now, amazingly good shape, considering that those 2 near the parking lot have had cars parking in their root areas. It's really important, I think, for us to consider preserving each of those healthy trees wherever possible, and also during any construction work, protecting those trees and their root areas. That's very important, and it's often overlooked. Oftentimes, people will pile a lot of construction material on top of root zones, or will park equipment there, or will dig it up. It's really important while we're working on this park that we protect the existing trees so that they continue to provide the beauty and shade and ecological services that they currently provide.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mark?
Mark Richard, 77 Riverside Street. I wonder if you could extend the red paver area a little bit more to the right, to sort of almost abut the parking spaces there, and similarly on the left, maybe the bigger sort of plaza area. Point one. Point two, I've driven these kinds of shared spaces in Europe, and somebody's concerned, when you enter them in a car, you really slow down. You're sort of like a fly, sort of looking at the left or the right, the front and back, looking at bicycles, looking at people. You really, really slow down. It's an experience where you're almost crawling. You're in first gear, and you barely can budge as you go through these things. But it's extremely safe. If you hit anybody, you nudge them at best. The possibility for accident is extraordinarily low.
It reminds me of the time I ended up driving through the Spanish Steps in Rome. I'm not sure that was a shared area where vehicles are allowed, but I couldn't read any of the signs because they were all in Italian, so I went with it. But Jay.
David J. Landscape
Hey,
Architect.
David, sorry, David.
360 Charles River Road in Watertown. A few quick notes on sustainability initiatives. I applaud the infiltration planters. Really think about handling the stormwater, slowing it down, get it to infiltrate. Rain gardens, bioswales, and pervious pavements would be a very positive move. Shade trees for cooling and preserve existing trees. Efficient lighting. Native planting supporting pollinators and wildlife, and locally sourced materials. You don't want to be shipping pavers from the Midwest or something. And signage illustrating these initiatives that's been done. I love the shared space. I think it could work very well. I think you could put curbs on either side. When a vehicle rises up into this area, they will know they're in a shared space. When you step off a curb, you know you're in a shared space. You're in a vehicle zone, and you're going to be careful. I don't think it would be necessary, but it is an option. I think it's great. I love the reg.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Back to the committee, Steve.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the committee endorse the concept of a shared street for the driveway area between the two parking spaces. The one change I would suggest to the sketch that Glenn had prepared was the suggestion of expanding a little further back to closer to the parking spaces at either end, so maybe expand it a little bit further.
Okay, anybody to second that?
I'll second
Okay, so discussion. Kelly?
Just to repeat it, how are you dealing with the entranceway? Is that going to be, are we going to have more, for people to phrase, oomph there? Or what? How are we dealing with that? Are we going to include this in the driveway, or it's a later thing? I would like to see the driveways upgraded, however that ends up, whatever the detail.
And you're just, Ellis, your question is about here.
Correct.
Yeah, so let's separate the decision on what we're doing here with just this one first, and then we can come back and revisit that, just so we can, if the committee's okay with that, so. Okay, Mike.
Are we dealing with lighting at all on this, or is this just the ground surface?
I think we'll come back to lighting
Okay.
Next meeting when we'll talk about the lighting of the courts in the field and the parking areas and everything. So I think it'd be better if we dealt with all lighting.
Can I ask a question, please? Steve, can you quantify how many feet would you like to extend that?
At least my
I mean,
thought
I'm
was,
just visual.
and I don't I don't have the measurement, but start here at the corner where the first parking space is, as opposed to sending it back. And then at this end, you know, probably bring it down to the road a little bit further, maybe another 20 feet, based on the scale. So 20 feet at one end and probably, maybe 10 feet at the other.
Okay, Bill?
Otherwise,
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So unanimous. That's great. Before we move on to stormwater perimeter walls and fencing, a couple other loose ends on this. So one of them is Elliot's question about, do we want to address, does the committee want to talk a little bit about what we want to do with the entryway to the parking area?
I would certainly agree that we should do something to dress it up, you know, make it a more presentable entry. I'm not sure I have any specifics in terms of details of what that ought to be, but I would certainly agree with that and, you know, endorse that concept.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
I would like a dramatic entry. I mean, I just really think having something that's high and visual and sculptural, for lack of a better word. I saw a beautiful thing that was done like a burnt out metal, and it was, I can't remember the name of it, but it was a park. But I think it should be something that's oomphy, so that people are going into something and it's a headset change. And I think, for me, I would move the cannon right there. You see it, you have a plaque, it kind of details everything that people know much more about than I do. But to say you're in a special place, I think it just sells differently.
Anybody else?
And I agree with Elliot also at the other end, Vinny. I think it's important that the old, what do you call those things, Steve, bollards, whatever, that gets cleaned up and is much more attractive. It's all rusted out and all that jazz, but it can be done much nicer.
Well, do we don't have to fully design it today, but
Right.
is a sense of the committee that we want both the Orchard Street entrance to be enhanced and upgraded, as well as the Marion Road entryway to be cleaned up and rehabilitated?
Yeah, more attractive.
And we can, the specifics of that will be left to a future date. But if that's the sense of the committee, that those two areas should be, you know, obviously Orchard Street's going to get more significant landscaping than sort of the rear entrance. Is that,
Absolutely.
does everybody on the committee agree to that?
Yes.
I guess how could you not? So, is that, Peter, you okay with that?
Yes, sir.
So let's just say that we agree. Just one second. Did somebody from the public have a question? Susan?
Terrific ideas. I think it's better than I ever expected. It's beautiful. And not only do I want to dress up the entrance, maybe with that cannon, my grandfather, I don't know how many in this room have known it, but my grandfather was a World War I veteran, actually both grandfathers. But my grandfather, Tony Foligno, that erected it in the town of Watertown, this was his plaque originally. It was at the cannon, I don't know how many of you know it. But there was a much bigger plaque there. It was taken and removed, but it was in honor of him to begin with. I don't even know the year he erected it. I'm not sure, but I know somebody, a police officer said to me, there's another plaque like this on Poplar Street that says 1947 underneath it. But I couldn't tell you what year Tony Felix Foligno erected the cannon. But originally, it was at the entrance. I remember as a kid, it was at the entrance, and another time was at the side, or the back of the Victory Field, or the side back. You might remember that too. But I'd love to see also, apart from the cannon issue, the entrance of the tot lot be dressed up too. That's another big main entrance that you have for children. It's not a great entranceway at all. It's a lousy little sign. I don't even like the design of the tot lot. I hate to say it. It's done prematurely before this meeting was ever done. I would have done it completely different. I would have a different style top lot, as you all know, because I like the Mayor Menino top lot. It's erected in front of Spalding. We can't go back now, we know how to go forward. But that's my feeling. Can you do something about that, the entrance to the top house?
Okay, thank you. Russ?
You know, as a veteran myself, really, I agree with this. But it's something that what this committee should decide is that, yes, we have to make the entrance to Victory Field welcoming and to explain to the people why this is called Victory Field and the sacrifices made. Because a lot of people live in our country don't understand that freedom is not free. Many Americans have fought, died, lost limbs, legs, and everything else to defend the freedom that we have here today. And every opportunity we get to express that, it's extremely important. And I'll just give you an example. About 15 years ago, if you wanted a plaque put in a cemetery of a veteran, if there was no stone there, the government would pay to put a plaque there. But within the last 15 years, it was decided that we need to show people that the sacrifices that have been made for this country. And now any veteran can have a plaque put on there. Another thing is, those of us that were prior military, all right, we were not, unless we were in uniform, or unless we had a cap on, we weren't allowed to salute the flag. We were told that we had to put our hand by our heart. Today they want to change that to the fact that people would know amongst us who has served this country. And that's why, as a veteran today, when we said the Pledge of Allegiance, I salute the flag. And we got to do as many things as we can to remind people of the sacrifices that many have made for the wonderful country that we live in today and the freedoms that we enjoy. And even a committee here, we're not dictated to. We have a representative government, and we the people have a chance to put input. And I think these are the reasons why it's very important. But the only decision that should be made here is we have to do something, and let's agree to do something, and let many minds get together, brainstorm it, and come up with something that's real nice.
Yes, thank you.
You are.
One couple other just loose items relating to this driveway. We discussed this last time about the utility poles and overhead wires. And I promised that we would come back to that issue again. So having decided to endorse the concept of the complete street, that we are going to need to address the issue of the power poles that are there with the overhead wires. So my question is, and I know there's a cost associated with that, and I don't want to get hung up on cost, but if we believe that it is our opportunity to reposition this area as parkland, I believe we agreed we would talk about, does that include removing those poles and burying the power lines? Just so the member of the public knows, when this used to be Marion Road, this actually was a public roadway. Like any other public roadways in town, it had utility poles and overhead wires on it, but it was discontinued as a public roadway, and it's now actually parkland. It's no longer a public road. But those poles have been there since, day one, since the 20s. The wires on those poles do not serve any of the abutting neighborhoods. It's only serving the equipment that's on the site. And there's 3 transformers there. One feeds the elevator building, the elevator machine room. One feeds the lights at Victory Field Phase 1, and one feeds the field house. So those were the 3 transformers on the poles. So I guess, what does the committee want to do? Do we want to make a recommendation that we, moving forward with this renovation, that we should seek to remove the poles and bury those wires? Or do we want to not do that? So I will throw that out there. Who would like to speak first on it?
We are putting so much effort into really unifying this park field and making this aesthetically a beautiful environment for everyone that uses it, both our our kids, our school teams, et cetera, and the general public. It would be ridiculous to spend this much money and not drop those poles. It's short money over the years that this field is going to be in place, and I think it's crazy to not drop them. I mean, it's inconsequential amount of money when you think of everything else that we're doing. Let's just do it right and do it right once.
Tony?
Yeah, do anybody know how much it generally is? To put these wires underground? And does it affect the stormwater issue? And
So how much it costs and does it affect the stormwater? Does maybe Steve or Glenn want to take that up?
I don't think it would affect the stormwater issue to any great extent, because you just put a conduit. Obviously the conduit and, might have a physical limitation on exactly where it is, but that's probably insignificant. The cost can be significant. I don't want to venture a guess in terms of this limited run because it's not that long. So I guess from my perspective, I would support the idea of burying the wires with the caveat that be put in the context of the larger project, and when the council was considering authorizing funds to do this, I would not be surprised if there are some things that are more expensive than we bargained for, and we may need to do some value engineering and such. So, just a caveat that might be one of the things that is too expensive to do. But I certainly would agree with Elodia that, while we're here, while we're doing this, while we're making it the future of the park, that we ought to do whatever we can to bury those wires.
Anybody else? Elliot?
I think burying them would be transformative for this space. Would be a major change. I think I wonder in terms of cost, since you're going to be doing a lot of excavation and doing a huge amount of excavation and changing of grades even, does that reduce the cost? Although I think even if the cost is high, you still do it. But it's just a thought. It can't be the same amount as digging up concrete to the sidewalk or street, digging it up, moving that dirt. There's cost to that, and now you're not having that cost. But it's still, which is not to say it won't be expensive, but I think my hunch is it'd be a tad less expensive. But the major issue is really, I think it would be transformative and an important thing to do.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I have
Ann?
a comment. I'm for burying the poles, totally. But I do have a question for Glenn. If for some reason it was decided that we cannot bury the poles due to money or whatever other reason, does it affect the whole concept? Then it also
It'll work the way it is.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. Anybody else? Tony?
yeah, I'm not ready to sign off on it, only because I don't know what the cost is. And I mean, if we sign off on it, are we saying that it's a priority over other things? So if someone says that we want to plant more trees, or we want to put more benches in, or we want to fix up the front, are we saying that this is more important than something else? And I'm not ready to say that this is more important than other things that we want to do. And I'm afraid that by saying, well, we're not voting, maybe we're just thinking it through, but I'm not ready to say it's a priority over other things that I know people want to see happen in that area, in the field.
And just, if I could just, when this committee was created by the vote of the council, one of the things about it is that we were tasked with coming up with a design concept and not to consider cost. If you recall that.
I remember that.
And many people say, well, how can that be that we're not going to consider cost? And the reason is, there's many different elements here, and it's hard to put together for us as a committee to figure out what this is all going to cost, because we're not engineers, we're not contractors, and depending what the final package is, it's going to be developed as in construction drawings and then gone out to bid. And typically with projects like this, and we've done other park projects like this, we've come up with a design and it's gone out to bid. and we've come back and it's been more than the council had budgeted for the project. And so we've gone back and redesigned it and sometimes broken it out into bid alternates. You know, here's the base bid, and if we want to bury the wires, it's, you know, give us an alternate price for that. If we want to do this, like we did with Casey Park and some other stuff. So the council, you know, once the council takes our recommendation from this committee, there's a lot of other work to be done, and one of that is how, you know, basically going out to bid and how we're going to pay, how the council's going to pay for it, how we as a community are going to pay for it. And at that point, the council set the priorities about, you know, okay, let's go out for the whole thing to bid. Oh, it's $200,000 more than we had budgeted. All right, let's break it out into a bid package, and then the council can say, all right, well, we've got the base bid, we've got these 4 alternates, and the council will then be the ones who choose and prioritize it, not us. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of how things were planned.
I'm guessing that this will go, you know, once this goes to council, and if we get authorized to move forward with a design on this, it will be similar to what we did with, when we did it and came up with the concept plan for the other concept, because we took it to a third kind of a conceptual level. We had estimated general costs for the big items, so at the 30% stage, we're gonna have kind of a menu of what the field is gonna cost, what the track renovation is gonna cost, what burying these utilities would cost. So at that earlier stage, even the council, the town's gonna have the opportunity to look at these things and maybe say, no, you know, now as you take it from 30% to say 60%, we're not gonna go with the utilities, don't take that any further.
So yeah, and at that point, I guess, so it's just, I guess in summary, if we don't recommend it, it's not gonna get into the conceptual design to the council, and then it's dead. If we do recommend it and it's too much, the council may decide they don't wanna do it. Well, that's, you know, that's the decision the council will make. So I just wanna, really quick, did anybody in the public wanna speak on this, or we're all in agreement, we can move on to something else? Okay, David.
I'll just say very quickly, if you're reconstructing the road anyways, it's just a matter of digging a trench through the material that's there, or to be replaced anyways, and laying conduit pipe, and not a lot of money in that. It may be that the expense comes in actually moving the wires and removing the poles or something. And if you absolutely can't pay for the whole thing, perhaps you consider installing those conduits for later use or something. But I think it would make a huge difference. As it's gone, it allows you to grow the trees.
Okay, so I just, do we want to just do a sense of the council that we, sense of the committee that we recommend removing of utility poles and burying the overhead wires?
So moved. Yes.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Any no's? Okay.
Council Picciarelli, will you stop looking at me when you want looking at I mean, I raised all my sons 14 years old, every time you say no, your head turns to me. With all due respect.
That's my tell, okay?
Hey, it's the first time we're all agreeing on everything.
Well, there's somebody missing from the committee.
Sometimes, Peter, I also look the other way, too.
He gives me a little dagger.
And just one last thing before we leave the driveway and move on to the stormwater system. I want to bring up Bob Shore, who lives on Marion Road, was looking at this area, and he pointed out that if you look at the original design, sort of the original design, we had sort of the high jump area on the right-hand side, and then we did, with the proposed design, we flipped it around to put the high jump area on the other side. And you remember when Coach Witt was here, and we talked about the storage units, putting them there, and the question was raised, why was this field flipped over from this side to that side? And Witt said, well, because we wanted the high jump and pole vault equipment to be close to the storage units. Bob Shore pointed out that, this area
right now, today, is sort of, today is a dead area. And his suggestion was, well, instead of putting the storage units at the end of the track down here, could we move them here along the back of the back of the bleachers, which is sort of a less visually obtrusive area. So that's, I promised that I would raise that as an issue for us to consider. I'm not going to ask the committee to discuss it or vote on it tonight, but I just want you to think about it, and when we come back at the meeting on October 17th, where we had agreed that we're going to revisit all the other previous decisions that we made and see how all the pieces fit together, I would propose that we would take that up as a concept at that point. So I just, we don't, I don't want to spring that on you, but he did bring it up in the context of what we're doing here with the shared roadway, so I did want to just bring that up, and we can talk about it later, unless anybody had just
I just have a quick question about that. How does that impact what we just discussed tonight? If you did try to put the storage containers by where the back of the bleachers are, then is that affecting the plan that Glenn came up with?
I think it reduces the area you have, but it would all be within the area outside the curb line. So I think we could still discuss that in the context.
And again, I think Bob's idea was instead of putting additional paving, instead of putting paving here, put the storage buildings on,
Right.
would that be better doing it somewhere on the other side where it would have less impact, less impact.
And then flipping the field back.
And then flipping the field back.
That would make Tom Sullivan happy.
Yes, true.
So anyway, so I don't, again, I just think about it, it's a placeholder, we'll revisit that as one of many other issues we promised to revisit. But I did promise Bob Shore that I would raise that tonight, so I just wanted to do that.
Can I add one comment?
Yes, Glenn?
Based on the discussions of the building last time and the size of this building, it might be worth just getting in the back of your head, maybe we end up dividing this up into two smaller structures, one up there and one over by the track. That way you don't have any one large structure that's blocking views, it doesn't look like such an intrusive thing at the end of the track. So again, we'll talk more about that.
So talk about it, and even, you as the designer, if you could just sort of keep that in mind as we move forward, what potentially some of the options could be. But we'll take that up at the October 17th meeting. Okay.
Council, I'm sorry, we have a lot of handouts out front, and I notice a lot of people don't have the handouts. I mean, and I could pass them out, it just seems like it's
So
just.
there are handouts, yes, so there are some handouts here, if people want to have them on stormwater control options, site amenities, noise control fencing, and equipment. I'd like to sort of move on, we've got some momentum, and I'd like to move on to,
You're not going to get out of
which is
it.
very, very rare that we have that. Talk about the stormwater. Now, stormwater is a very technical issue. I think Glenn had a map. Let me just say, this committee doesn't need to design a stormwater system. We just need to make sure that whatever we're doing moving forward is addressing on a high level what needs to be done. So I'd ask Glenn to maybe just bring a map of what's there and sort of talk about what we're going to do at a high level. And I just want to say that the town has a stormwater advisory committee. We have some members here. And the town has taken a very aggressive approach. Matt Schuman here is here, the town engineer for the DPW. The town has taken a very aggressive approach to managing stormwater in Watertown, including the town council had passed stormwater ordinances sort of specifically addressing when construction projects of this size are done, what we need to do to maintain stormwater on site in as much as practical. So there is stormwater, a stormwater system on the site. There's catch basins and manholes. If anybody goes down there, they'll see them. Maybe, Glenn, if you give us sort of just a brief 25 words or less.
25 words or less.
Excuse me, Glenn, you don't have a small version of that by any
No, I
chance,
just
do?
did
This is
this
it.
afternoon.
Yeah, we had a wonderful experience with the water on last week.
So just, so, and the thing is, what do we have today, and sort of, what are we proposing to do, with the renovations?
All right, I'm gonna go backwards a little bit. So there's a 60-inch, a massive drain line that runs off through the private property and out onto, is it Catherine Road out there? 60-inch, big, it's like 5 feet in diameter. From there, you've got multiple lines. One comes from Orchard Street, one comes from the park. 36-inch, which is another large pipe, comes from the park. Everything within the park, to keep this general in 25 words, everything ends up in this 36-inch line at this manhole and then goes out into that 60. There's a lot of other little details, lots of catch basins. There's some old abandoned drain lines on here, a couple of catch basins. I'm not even sure exactly where these tie in, but everything ends up coming out of here. The original Victory project, we used the field to do a lot of storage, but even any overflow from Victory Field ends up in this system. We put a couple of new manholes in here, a really large infiltration manhole, but any overflow, there is an overflow pipe that ends up in here. So that's kind of the gist of what's going on. The field itself, there's a series of catch basins around the perimeter. I think there's a 6-inch under drain, whether it's perforated for infiltration, I don't know. But these drains, even the field drainage ends up going out. There's a handout for options. In general, there's kind of 3 regulatory agencies we have to deal with. One is the state. They have standards that require a certain level of infiltration if you increase the impervious area. So if we had pavements or anywhere, any hard surface, we have to then look at infiltrating stormwater from the whole site. I'm not going to go into the details of how much, but the state has a standard. The town of Watertown has, their stormwater regulations far exceed the state standard. So the town of Watertown, to the best applicable, I don't know what the word is, but best
To the extent practical.
they would like to see a 100-year storm infiltrated on site, which means in a 100-year storm, none of the water ends up at this manhole. It all just infiltrates. So that's kind of general. There's going to be new regulations from the EPA. It's called MS4. It's a town-wide requirement, not site-specific. So the town ultimately is going to have to be looking at this from a town perspective, and they're going to be, every time there's a development, they're going to say, well, let's do something here because that'll help us overall. And that looks at all municipal facilities, not just parks. So like even the DPW parking lot or any public municipal facility, paved areas and things like that. That all goes under this MS4 umbrella. That's a new thing by the EPA, but it's right now it's held up in litigation. So that's not something, as we get into this design, we're probably going to be thinking that, and the town of Watertown standards exceed the volume that I was talking about. So the town of Watertown has the most strict volume. There's another stormwater quality I won't get into. EPA, the MS4 has all to do with quality and what the quality of the water is coming off. But so there's a handout there of things we can do to infiltrate. For this meeting, in order to really start to look at what we can do here, we have to understand how much area we're increasing, how much hard pavements we're increasing and things like that. We have to do all the well, I don't even, this is even a little bit above my expertise as a landscape architect. We have stormwater engineers who look at everything we're doing. They run all sorts of calculations, and then they start to take each of these things, whether you're having infiltration pavers that allows the water to move through, or whether you have a subsurface system like in the one picture there that's under the tennis court. We can store and infiltrate stormwater under hard surfaces. We can store and infiltrate water under the field if we want to. So the engineers start to do all these calculations and look at some of these options and figure out how much we can actually infiltrate on the site. It does become difficult. This, we've been talking about for these several meetings. There's a lot of infrastructure on here. There's not a lot of open space. And so doing things like stormwater basins or rain gardens, which are really common, not really practical on the site. We had talked at one of the meetings about maybe trying to make up a little teeny space for a small rain garden. I brought that up in a meeting. So we're looking at every bit of space, looking at every option. In this meeting, what might be valuable is if Matt maybe says, there's things we've done in town that don't work, or there's things we know we don't want to try, or everything's kind of open and we can look at everything at this point. But that's kind of a general overview. So there's no proposal right now for how we will manage stormwater on the site until we have a final concept plan, and we can start doing these calculations and look at how we can reduce the volumes of stormwater.
Okay, just to summarize, in 25 words or less, our goal, so this committee doesn't really need to make any recommendations, because the town of Watertown, in doing this project, town of Watertown's gonna say, the design criteria is we're gonna maintain water from a 100-year storm on site. And how we do that from an engineering standpoint will depend on what the final design looks like. And if this committee is okay with that, I'm not sure we need to actually do more than that other than to endorse that concept. But I would be happy to let, if Matt wanted to say something, you certainly could say something first. And then if the committee would want to just sort of weigh in on that, I'd be happy to maybe take it that way. So, Matt, did you have anything?
I think Glenn summarized it very well.
Matt, you might want to stand up so everybody else can hear you as well.
This is Matt Schuman, who's a town engineer.
I think Glenn summarized it really well. I would like the designer to look at rain gardens. I think small ones, breaking up the site into a lot of little areas might work. I think, and I don't know if everyone has the handout, but kind of the rain gardens are on the center of the handout. But you can see that they really can be made an amenity. They can be made a landscape feature, not just a stormwater feature. So I would lean heavily towards those. The idea of subsurface infiltration is something we can also consider. There are cost considerations, there are soils considerations, a lot of utilities considerations, just like Glenn pointed out, but I think that's also options that we could look at. In terms of porous pavement and permeable pavers, a little bit more hesitant on that. They do have maintenance issues. That's something we could discuss a little bit further, but you know, from a DPW standpoint, we don't want to install something that's going to be a maintenance issue or is going to be subject to failure in the future. And I think that a lot of the benefits of the porous pavement or the permeable pavement could be also met with some of these other methods.
Okay. Tony.
I'm a little confused about the last thing you just said, because we just spent some time talking about the shared space, and the shared space I thought was going to possibly have some of these pavers, permeable pavers, and porous asphalt. So are you saying that that whole space that we just were talking about in between the two parking lots that we might not be going with, that might not be helpful to us to use those? Or are we going to go back to asphalt? Or
Well, I think, you know, Glenn had said during the discussion that that's something we'd have to discuss with DPW further. I'm not saying that we wouldn't use pavers, it's just whether we would consider them porous pavers or we would take credit from a stormwater standpoint, maybe not necessarily, because those are prone to clogging. So you could design something, for example, that uses a porous paver, but also have a drainage system so that in the event it does fail, you still have drainage. So I don't think we're ruling out pavers per se, it's just kind of the stormwater details of how those function. And I don't think we're saying it has to be regular asphalt.
Okay. Elliot and then Peter.
For parking areas, isn't it more likely that you could have permeable asphalt rather than opposed to the driveway? So that you could pick up all those areas would be, where your parking would be permeable. Isn't that a fairly feasible, cost-effective, and for maintenance as well?
You know, permeable pavement has a number of options. You know,
I'm talking about the parking now,
a number of
specifically where you
issues.
park.
Even for parking, it does tend to clog. It is more expensive than regular pavement. So there are the maintenance issues associated with it. We haven't done permeable pavement in town on any of the town projects, although some other communities have. I'd be very hesitant to endorse that option, but never opposed to anything. But again, I think, you know, a thoughtful design, looking at some of these other surface features that can enhance the aesthetics of the site and meet the stormwater requirements just as equally as permeable pavement, and perhaps less costly. I would lean towards those.
if you're setting stuff in sand, doesn't that matter? Let's say if you have pavers that are setting in sand instead of a concrete. That's,
Well,
and the pavers are pretty substantial, but you're using the grout, I mean, it percolates down through the sand. No?
That's correct, and I'll defer to Glenn if he wants to chime in, but the issue is, over time, the pores in the porous pavement tend to clog up with sediment. It's very difficult to get that sediment out once it's in it. It gets in from dirt, it gets in from, we don't really sand, but he get in from sand, so it tends to clog. That's our biggest concern. My other concern with pavers, which is why we would need to talk about details, is we're talking about using it as a pedestrian surface. We want to make sure that it's durable and that it doesn't start settling, and we don't start having potholes or trip hazards. So that's something, a detail that we work out as we move along further.
It definitely becomes more of an issue for snow plow, like when you've got an area with just paver, even any concrete paver, over time, they start to move a little bit. You've seen when you go to a pedestrian place, sometimes when you're plowing, it tends to cause damage sometimes. So there's definitely more maintenance concerns. It's something the town's gonna have to balance when it comes down to getting the details of this pulled together,
Peter, and then Steve.
And I'm not a stormwater expert, I learned a lot, but I just do want to say, when we did this initial plan, we met with the Stormwater Advisory Committee in May 15, 2014, so we are committed to that. I will say, I won't say the T word, but we have 160,000 square feet of very permeable field surface that is bowed very, very well. I was hoping it would rain today so they could demonstrate it, but maybe tomorrow. We are committed to stormwater. So we always have to think of all things. And the other thing we put two, Glenn designed down at 552 Main Street, 2 rain gardens. So I think a combination of those. But again, the artificial surface bodes well for stormwater control.
I wanted to maybe offer a little, I don't know if clarification or whatever, to some of what Matt was saying. I think porous asphalt does have a history of clogging, and unless it is regularly vacuum swept, it clogs and has a tendency to fail. So I would agree very much with Matt that porous asphalt is something that we haven't tended to endorse in town. I think there are options with pavers, however, that can remain largely pervious and don't tend to clog, because it is the seams around the pavers where the infiltration is occurring, which is a bigger space. It's not that very fine system of porosity in the asphalt that clogs for porous pavement. So I think there's still a lot of things we can consider, but having said all that, the bottom line being, as Councilor Picciarelli said, when we get to design, we're going to address stormwater in a holistic manner, and whether it'll be a combination of things, and we'll certainly incorporate, as Stormwater Advisory Committee recommended and discussed, incorporate as much as is practicable to incorporate stormwater back into the ground with the final design. Okay. Tony?
Yeah, I'm getting a little confused about this again, maybe it's into the details. So let me try to make sure I understand something, particularly given the shared space discussion we just had. Are we saying that there's a possibility that the shared space that we were just talking about will not be using either permeable pavers or porous asphalt? Are we saying that? And therefore, if we are saying that, what is an alternative to make the shared space feel like it is different than an asphalt driveway?
So I would say there's two things. One, a change in surface treatment, I think, is most important to make it a different space. That can be just a color change, so it doesn't necessarily have, or is dependent upon whether it's porous or impermeable. I think, as we've talked about, we'd like it to be permeable, and we'll certainly explore those options as we go forward with looking at different treatments. That'd be preferable. But even if it's not porous, it certainly can be a different surface treatment and make it clear that it is a different space.
So maybe the point for me is who's making these decisions and at what point do we make these decisions? At first, we keep saying we will look at. Are we as a body supposed to be making decisions about what that shared space is to look like? Or are we, and which pieces of the stormwater design we're supposed to be looking at? And if there's a trade-off between every time you cover something, if you say there's a trade-off between the amount of hard space that we have to how much has to be infiltrated, would it mean that if we did use just asphalt on the shared space, painting it different colors, that would affect the volume of infiltration? Am I correct?
Yes.
Go ahead, or Steve, go ahead,
Yeah.
Steve, whatever. And so the more we could use pavers, permeable pavers, the less, that's not considered hard surface, right? That's considered infiltration, right? So the more we can do that, the better. And the more that, to me, clearly delineates something to make it feel like we're in something different than, you know, you paint your driveway. But that doesn't, to me, kind of do anything in terms of surface treatment. If you want to make a shared space feel like it's something you sit in and walk on, and there's some benches and so forth, it would seem to me that you need to do some of the pavers and possibly the, well, you already decided that porous asphalt is not the way to go. Can I just ask one question though about the permeable pavers? What happens what is the issue around maintenance of permeable pavers? I mean, I think what's the main concern about how they're maintained? What's the additional cost to maintain those?
First of all, I think Matt was saying that DPW would be probably more amenable to precast concrete pavers and not permeable pavers. I think that's one thing you were saying.
Well, yeah, having not very much information about the site or having had any previous discussions, we would consider both, but we have to consider.
What's the difference between the two?
A precast concrete brick block paver is not going to allow this. The way you lay them out, you don't leave seams, you don't leave there's actually pavers that have openings that allow water right through, and they're filled with like a fine stone. There's all different types of pavers. I think what Matt was saying is for long-term, lower maintenance, meaning long-term stability of a surface, precast concrete pavers on a really well-designed base are going to last longer and be less susceptible to damage from plowing or whatever than possibly permeable pavers. But it really goes into how we're going to set these things, coordinate, coming up with a design that DPW agrees, okay, here's what we want to do. If you're going to do permeable pavers, this is what we're going to expect from a setting bed. This is what we're going to expect from a base below the setting bed. You got to show us that the soils below that are going to take the water and it's not going to become saturated and allow these pavers to settle and become ununiform. And then when we come in and plow, the pavers are going to get all torn up. So it's real, I think they'll go along with it. That's show us that the soils are going to be suitable for this. Show us that you're going to design a base under this that's going to keep the maintenance, get long-term maintenance down. The first, you put these in the first year or two, it's going to be beautiful. It's not going to be an issue, but it's not designed right. Yeah, and you've seen pavers, plazas, and they start to come up.
Right. So I'm simply saying is that I understand now the difference, and I understand what you're driving at in terms of maintenance. I'm just wondering whether this committee can make some recommendation. And again, if we're making recommendations irrespective of costs, then let's make recommendations that there be permeable pavers used as much as possible and specifically be used in the shared space. I just don't know why we can't do that.
I think it's different from what Matt and Glenn are saying, where you are going to be plowing versus where you might be walking. So I think, when I'm hearing this, I'm thinking of all the elements that go into stormwater. So for example, if we're going to be digging up the field to look and check pipes, are we going to be putting in some of these filtration things as we would have done with the artificial turf fields. So wouldn't we be doing the same thing if we're going to have a really good grass field? Because I certainly know when I talked to the natural turf people, they talked a lot about how you do good drainage and all that kind of stuff. And not to go back to our last discussion, but when I'm looking at all those pipes going to that end of the field, which is near Ann's house, I'm thinking it seems to make really good sense to flip that field and put that rubberized surface near the roadway so that you have as much open green space in that area as possible, rather than having another surface there. I know we're kind of moving around because I'm looking at all those pipes. I had no idea there was that much at that end of the field. So I think what I'm thinking of is where do we get the right amount for stormwater, and how many elements do we have to incorporate to get it right? Because you can see beautiful roadways, Tony, that are both colored and texturized and embedded, whether it's concrete or whatever, and it looks gorgeous, but it's how do you get the percentages correct for the stormwater? Have I got that, guys? Or David, can you speak to this? This is David Stokes, who's chair of the Stormwater Committee. Did I give you the right title?
Yes.
Okay. Also running for town council.
Did you want to say something, David?
If I could. The Stormwater Advisory Committee spoke at length about this particular project over the course of 2 meetings, and we also are not stormwater engineers by trade, the people who sit on the committee, but we are looking for a couple of things. One is to kind of adhere to the permit requirements that the town council's already put in place with the ordinance, the stormwater ordinance. The second thing, and so Glenn's already kind of touched on that piece of it, the how much do you have to hold? The second part is that we're also looking for things that we could use to highlight stormwater around town. So whether that's holding water underneath the tennis courts using a permeable surface, or it's a rain garden in the corner. We're looking for demonstrations of best practices for stormwater that we can use, and this is a perfect place to do it. So I think that we've communicated that to the committee, and so I'm saying it mostly to the audience, and I'm sure Glenn's already also heard that before, but we would love to see a rain garden. We would love to see tennis court that maybe is permeable. That's, with the ability for the parks and the DPW to be able to maintain it. And all of that exists. And there's a lot of technology that's new that we get and more advanced every day. So we want to take a look at all of that, I think.
Libby?
I just want to say something. People seem to be rejecting permeable asphalt out of hand, but I just want to point out that the issue, as I understand it, with permeable asphalt is strictly maintenance. And if you've got a DPW that is equipped and trained to maintain permeable asphalt, it's a wonderful solution. Permeable asphalt is a smooth surface. You don't have to worry about the plows messing it up as they plow along and scrape along. It's a wonderful surface because it doesn't ice up. So if this is going to be a shared walkway, you're not going to have people slipping on the ice. You don't have to use a lot of salt on that surface. That's better for all the greenscape as well as just better for the environment in general. I would really like to see our DPW much more seriously consider permeable pavement because it has a lot of pluses.
Very quickly, in Walden Pond, they installed permeable asphalt in the 70s, and they're still using it.
Oh, that's great to know, David, thank you.
Couldn't this be an experiment for the town, since it's it's not a particularly long stretch of land?
That's a big plan.
So that if we did use it in that shared parking, the shared complete street area, it could be an experiment to see if it works anywhere else. I mean, as an example, and you'd see how much it wears, and what the maintenance is to it. And it's not like we're taking a big long street or even some side streets and using it. We're using it, how long is that space? Right?
Sorry, I don't know.
What is it?
I see more of a benefit if you were gonna experiment with permeable asphalt in the parking, as someone mentioned back here, in the areas of the parking spaces.
Oh, is that right?
I think you wanna keep that shared space, some other kind of a paver or something that really is a pedestrian kind of friendly and calls it out as a plaza or something.
Oh, that's good, because I thought earlier you were saying we should paint, use it and paint it.
I said that's a possible treatment, but I don't like colored asphalt, to be honest. I don't like stamped concrete. If we can come up with a design that DPW, goes along with pavers, I mean, that's really what you want to see if you're really serious about creating a kind of a shared
space.
open
Well, I would
space.
just also like to suggest, and then again, Councilor Picciarelli, if determine how we move forward, but I would really like to say that this gives us an opportunity to do some experimentation with porous, permeable pavement, and they're not huge areas where those parking areas are. And if we have an opportunity to test it, this would be a great place to do it.
If I could just, Steve, and then I had a comment to make after Steve.
Okay, I was just gonna suggest that the biggest issue, I think, with permeable or porous asphalt is that you need the equipment to maintain it, which is a vacuum sweeper, which is a pretty substantial capital cost, and we don't currently have a vacuum sweeper. So I just wanna make sure, we all understand what we're saying, and so we're gonna go spend, a few $100,000 to buy a vacuum sweeper because we wanna have a 100-foot-long strip of porous asphalt. I'm just saying, we should, just go into it with eyes wide open.
So I'm just gonna, so the Stormwater Advisory Committee wrote us a letter, and I would like this committee to consider endorsing the 4 points that the Stormwater Committee made. And Joanne, you don't need to type this because it's already written, we can just copy and paste it in. So, but the 4 points that the Stormwater, and again, I'm gonna ask, maybe we wanna consider just our action on stormwater is to endorse these 4 points. The Stormwater Advisory Committee would like us to consider implementing the following 4 recommendations. Number 1, reach for the goal of reducing stormwater runoff rate, volume, and nutrient loading to the maximum extent practicable. Number 2, incorporate the following stormwater best management practices and features, again, to the maximum extent practicable. A, low-impact design techniques. B, pervious pavement. C, porous and other stormwater-friendly surface treatments, including on the tennis court and basketball court. D, various techniques for infiltration of stormwater. And E, reuse of stormwater for irrigation. Number 3, highlight stormwater best management practices and features of the Phase 2 renovation with a variety of educational signage and other showcasing techniques. And 4, introduce stormwater best management practices and features that do not require undue maintenance beyond current resources and effort levels for their success. So I think what we've discussed here, Steve's concerns, Matt's concerns, and other concerns, Tony's concern, I think they're all very thoughtfully contained in this 4-point recommendation from the Stormwater Advisory Committee. And our job, we don't need to design it. We need to make a recommendation on how to move forward with the design. And so I would propose that maybe this committee just endorses those 4 points. So
moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Just a quick comment, I agree with everything, but the surfaces, whatever we put down needs to be practical and safe. So for the courts, the fields, whatever surface we have, it needs to be practical and safe. That's all. I mean, other than that, yes.
Okay.
Lydia?
I just want to say also, Matt, and to Glenn, that many parents would love to have some kind of educational garden feature. I don't know where it would be appropriate. It seems near the top lot or something would be fantastic. That's seen by the community, that they can see it change through the seasons, and that it can be educative for the broader community, for the kids, etc. So that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Mike?
Yeah, I just have, I think we had some evaluation done from phase one. As far as I know, phase one stormwater control, has there been any issues with that at all? No, so I just want to compliment Glenn and DPW for the work they did on that, because I remember the system we put in was much more extensive than I expected it to go in, and I think it was maybe the restrictions that Watertown has. And so I have complete confidence in what they've done.
Yeah, and I think this is the phase one, just so everybody knows, you know, the hill, Whitney Hill comes down, and yeah, everybody thinks, you know, natural grass is perfect permeable surface. Well, the reality is it isn't. I mean, and anybody who understands the soil engineering. And every time it would rain, there'd be like 6 inches of standing water on the grass along the back of that field, and it just would not infiltrate into the ground, even though it was grass. So we ended up putting, I think it was 12 inches of crushed stone underneath the artificial turf, which provides a huge amount of infiltration and stormwater storage. So that is from an environmental standpoint, it really stores a lot of water and allows it to slowly drain it. So yes, so thank you. I'm gonna, I see Russ had a question.
Actually, it's a comment. I agree with the 4 suggestions, whatever you want to call them. But the underlining most important word was that it is practical. And we do not want anything that is a maintenance nightmare, because that is surely not practical.
Yes, and again, and that's why I think the letter that they wrote was very thoughtful, and considering that, you know, there are a lot of challenges in Watertown. And so anyway, so that's the motion, second. So all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you. Awesome.
Then you got Steve Kennedy.
Sorry, Steve Kennedy.
Sorry, following up on Tony's, I want to make sure I understood. One thing I think you established was that the aesthetics of the shared space aren't really affected by these drainages, they're constrained. So that seems important. Then the other thing you asked, which I never heard the answer to, was at what point does all this get worked out? From what you've said, I understand this is a really technical thing. You've got to get soil stuff and all sorts of calculations. So I just never heard the answer of sort of where does this come after the concepts? Just when does it happen in the design sequence?
Typical design of this scope and magnitude has probably got a length of about a 6-month design period, and we typically submit projects at a 30, 60, and a 90% on something this big to the town, to the town, and whoever's doing, you know, in this case, DPW would be looking at what we have probably at the 30, at least 30, and maybe 90, possibly 60. Around, right after the 30% conceptual design, we really start to get into the details.
Okay, thank you.
Denny, could I say something?
Yeah, and then Elliot.
I would just like to say that given the work of the committee and given the attention and the input of the community, it would be really great to hold meetings just for informational purposes as this goes along, to continue to educate the community, make us all aware of what's going on, and there may be some tweaks that are necessary. I imagine they'll be quite minor, but you know, we've got great momentum, we've got great buy-in, and let's stay positive and move forward. You know, I don't want to feel like, oh my God, we end in November and it's like I have no clue what's going on anymore. I think we'll be right back to square one. And so I'd like to keep this process as open and as informative to the broad community as possible. I don't know if that's part of our mission, but it gets into what Tony is saying, what Steve Kennedy is saying, and I think the intent of what we're trying to accomplish.
Elliot?
When it gets to contractoring, or the 80-90%, who is, DPW is handling it, or does Steve's department get involved, or who's the project manager, or what entity is pushing it? And when it's at 90%, when you're at contract drawings.
Yeah, that's up to the town, who the town representative is. I mean, it depends on the size. Some of the projects we've done have been small enough, Peter, and others, DPW's gotten more involved with like 552 Main Street and Casey Park improvements. I was dealing with DPW.
So in this case, who do you think, who's gonna have the?
I'll answer that question. Once the town council authorizes to proceed with the design and appropriates money for the design cost, then the administration, so as a recreational facility, it would be the rec department, and it's just typically a team of people, DPW, Department of Community Development Planning, and they'll work on it, but before, it always comes back to the council for an informational presentation to show the design before we vote to move forward, actually put it out to bid. And then once it goes out to bid, there's a public hearing and another vote of the council before we actually appropriate the money to move forward with the work. So the council ends up taking that role. And certainly I would hope the council would, to Volodya's point, would have those meetings at the 30, 60, 90%, progress points, just as informational presentations at the council level, so that the community knows what's going on. But typically, once it's the council takes that responsibility, because they're the ones that are actually appropriating.
I understand that, but if somebody is going to, some person or entity is going to be doing the day-to-day stuff on the contract drawings and is going to be reviewing them. You may get the bulk of them, but who? I don't quite understand from the city who's doing it at that. What entity is managing this thing? I know it gets reviewed by the council, but you have somebody, either it's an individual or a group of people with.
Typically,
how do you do it?
Typically, whatever firm is hired to do the design, works through the department who owns the facility. In which case, this would be the rec department, so they would take the leading role in terms of interfacing with the design. But again, because of the complexity of something like this, the DPW would be involved and the Department of Community Development would be involved. So.
Every project we've done, over the past several years too, has included a community process. I don't see, just because of the way this is going now, that once a design is authorized for CDM or whatever designer moves forward with this, I would think that there's still going to be a community process as part of that entire phase. So, like every other project Peter and I have worked on together, we've gotten the 30%, we've had a public meeting. So
yeah, and you think about like the Philip Park redesign, that went back, we had concept design, meetings with the public, feedback from the public, went back to the drawing board, changed it, came back to the did that 4 times. So it took 4 iterations of public input and design before we came up with something that the council was happy with, that the council was happy with, that the public was happy with.
So the 9% drawings are pretty technical. You got a pretty good. You get into some pretty interesting detail there, and it's a dominant part of the process actually.
So again, it's. But again, our job is to get that initial recommendation. And then,
okay.
But we will all stay involved at that point. So stormwater is done. The other point we want to talk about was the perimeter walls, and this is sort of like the. Sort of like the stormwater thing, it's not a lot of engineering design, and maybe Glenn just gives a short summary of where we are with the perimeter walls.
Are you talking walls and fences?
Let's talk about the walls, because I know there was a question about the retaining wall.
There's only one real wall, and it runs along the property of butters, right along this edge. It varies from a few feet in height in this area, and then it kind of feathers out. It almost is maybe like a foot high by the time you get out to this corner. So I'll tell you where we were at when we did the first concept design. DPW had alerted us that as part of this, we needed to look at this wall, that they thought that redeveloping this parking wall was going to be a big mistake. So I had a structural engineer from our office come out and take a look. Sure enough, he said, yeah, this wall's got some problems. I can't tell you by looking at it whether it needs to be completely replaced, whether it can be repaired. Some sections may have to be replaced, some may have to be repaired. So when we put our scope and budget in and put our contract together for the town, we included a task for our structural engineering group to go out and do a much more thorough analysis of those walls, and as part of our contract, they would come up for a redesign. So that's where we were at. There is gonna have to be a full structural design and evaluation to tell us exactly what we have to do with that wall. But the wall needs some work. I can't tell you at this point whether it needs to be replaced or whether it can be repaired.
Glenn, just to add something, though, you do have a wall that is started at the other end of the field, no, towards the driveway, going towards the field house, excuse me, it's behind Steve Kennedy's house. I can't see what you're...
It would be...
Yeah, right there, it does start up there, it starts there behind Steve's house, and that area needs to be addressed as well, because there's a differential between where the tennis courts are, there's material when the tennis courts were done the last time spilling into my property, into others, and it slopes again. So I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, but that has to be addressed. I don't know whether it's a wall or not, but something has to happen there.
You know, you got a double fence line, again, we'll move into the fence, there's
Right.
a double fence line with you and other property owners that has their fences, then you've got the chain link fence for the tennis courts, so that whole line needs to be discussed as to, you know, do you want to move to a single fence, do you want to move to a single wall, so that's...
Yeah, but there's also a huge...
There's a retaining wall.
Yeah, there's
there.
a drop that goes along, it's very odd, but, okay.
It is more, yeah, it's more informal. Anybody?
Well, I can...
Okay, well, okay.
The reason there's that little wall is that in fact the stuff from the tennis court pushed over and destroyed the wooden fence I had there. And so DPW, very nicely, when I called and pointed this out, came and built this little wall. But I think all I'm saying is it's a real issue for people further along.
Right.
That's all.
Okay, yes, Russ.
You know, what I don't understand here is what is the discussion if the town owns a retaining wall and the retaining wall is broken and it's not doing its job of holding the dirt back and there's dirt infiltrating into people's properties, what's the discussion? We need to fix that retaining wall. I don't understand what the discussion is here.
Yes.
Explain it to me, please.
So I just, Peter.
Basically, I think there's a couple of things going on here. Obviously, that whole retaining wall and the structure needs to be looked at and fixed and replaced. I mean, I'm under the recommendation, and I know especially in the tennis court, you have two fences, you got one fence, you got low, high. The whole area needs to be looked at, and this is where probably the love is gonna end. My recommendation is to put one of these noise barrier walls there to replace fencing all around. And I know some of the neighbors love to look in, they're not gonna like it. I know some of the neighbors like to look in, but then there's complaints about balls and whistles and so on and so forth. So, you know, I know this might be a little contentious, but I think you could build a wall to replace the fence all around, just to have one and fix it up really nice. And again, I know some people like to look in, you know, and some people, but we get a lot of complaints by, you know, people, it's too noisy, the kids are out there playing balls, and, you know, it's one of those things, well, which direction do you go? And so I like some of these noise control walls, you see a lot in the highway, they're really nice. They're really nice, and then you could kind of grow things on them after, but just a thought.
So if I could, just, Ann, before, I don't want to get into the, I just want...
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, please.
Okay.
No, I don't understand.
What?
One thing is a retaining wall, which retains dirt so it doesn't go into the other person's property. The other thing is a fence. So I think the two should be separated, and we should fully understand the need for a new retaining wall.
Right.
And then discuss the fence separately.
So it's just, and I just want, so I'm gonna ask the committee, the retaining wall is not rocket science, and I'm not sure that we even need to make a recommendation on a retaining wall, other than understand that the retaining wall will be fixed both on the east side as well as on the south side, or easterly side or southerly side, because it's that those, even though maybe CDM Smith only looked at the one along the eastern side, I think we need to look at what's going on with the grade change on the southerly side. And other than that, I'm not sure this committee really needs to make any kind of recommendation, as Mr. Rico pointed out, beyond that. And then if we could talk, if we agree on that, then we don't really need to make any official recommendation other than we understand that that will be done. Then we can come back, then we can move on to the discussion about the fencing. So is the committee okay with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, very good. So let's talk about, so Ann had her hand up.
Yeah, my comment was, and it has to do a little bit with the retaining wall and where it meets the fencing, because in my yard, some of the fencing, the posts are in the retaining wall. And it's been patched up and it's been double braced and it's, you know, so it kind of goes together in that way. And I can say that in the time that I've lived in this house, which is almost 20 years, no work has ever been done to the retaining wall. So it's in the condition that it was in when I bought the house. And, but, so moving on from the retaining wall and it's gonna be fixed or what, or replaced or whatever, the fencing is in some areas in the wall. So, no, so I don't know if that's something that will change or if a new fence will also be part of the wall.
I can tell you that under the original plan, we were going to, whatever we were gonna do with that wall, we were gonna take that, we were gonna cut that would all have been cut down, grouted, and then we were talking about bringing the new fence. It was gonna just be a chain link fence, but it was gonna be inside the wall, new footings and everything inside the wall.
Inside on the victory
Park-
field.
park side of the
Park
wall.
side, okay.
They wouldn't have, we were gonna take those out because I think in some cases, the fence is causing some of the problems with that wall.
Correct, as well as down by my, I don't know, closer to the tot lot, but I know from my end down to the end, and there's only one house after mine that I think is affected, we have this invasive growth that is also in the fence and in the wall. So, that has also ruined it.
Okay, Tony.
I like the idea of the fence being inside the wall, but whatever, if that's the idea, then we fix up the wall and we put a fence. And I like Peter's idea of some noise control fencing. And there are some very attractive looking things that could be done. And I like that concept of particularly behind the tennis court, where, you know, the more we can do, we've tried to deal with the lighting. I mean, we're gonna come back to the issue of lighting, but dealt with the lighting a little bit about that, and maybe that's gonna work. I think we should address the issue of noise, and I like the idea of some kind of noise control fencing, particularly in that area. I don't know if we need it the whole length of this length here.
Oh, here's the other.
I don't know if we need the whole thing here, but definitely it would be great to have it back in here. As a way to, I don't know, maybe it'd be better to have it the whole way for you.
Noise doesn't bother me at all. I don't have any issue with noise coming from Victory Field. And Peter, as Peter mentioned, you know, some people like, I mean, I also like to see the field. So I'm conflicted because I do like how these fences look too. So it would give me a little privacy. I don't know, I mean, I would just kind of go with whatever worked best, you know, for everyone. I don't have a strong opinion. I'm very much open to it.
So so there is, I don't know if anybody got the handout, but there was like some examples of noise barrier fencing. Typically what you see along the highway, some of them are cementitious materials, some of them are woody materials. So I guess the question of the fences, so there's a lot of things. So if I could maybe break the fence down to, we can have the big board here. So there's a couple of things. So we have this area, and then we talked about, you know, there's a fence, currently a fence here, this is currently a fence here, this is currently a fence here, and then there's fences around the court. So there's actually a lot of different kinds of fences, and maybe we could break it down into small areas and different things. Yes, Tony?
Can we start with the fence that might go behind, in front of folks who are on Marion Road near the tennis court? And it would seem to me that unless there's strong disagreement, I'd love to hear from the folks who live over there. I would like to move forward with putting up some kind of noise control fence along that area.
One consideration, so that anywhere along the tennis court, you really need to have a 12-foot height to keep the balls contained. So whether it's a combination of a noise barrier fence with additional, some other kind of fencing above. But if you just do like an 8-foot fence, which I wouldn't think you want more than an 8-foot fence wall behind your house, you've got to have additional considerations for those fence walls.
Okay, can I ask a question of Glenn, because I'm
Yes.
getting confused? Okay, right now on the Marion Road side, we have the black chain link fence, which, I mean, it disappears, it really does. And then I have my wood fence used to be against that, but then when the field got redone, all of a sudden apparently it was on my property. Now there's a space that's a pie shape. So we have all these seedlings growing up, or trees growing up, and that's the problem. And so, I mean, the only noise that bothers me is the amplification from the stadium, given the bowl that we're in, that when they blast the music before the game noise we don't hear, it's the music that's blasting it, get everybody revved up. Okay, and that comes right across here. So the idea that the kids on the courts laughing or tennis balls, it doesn't bother me. I'm happy to hear from other people in this audience, and I'm happy to go talk to all my neighbors. The real issue is the trash vegetation that's growing between the two fences, because again, between that material that got dumped from the last job, that's pushing my fence in, and we have just a weed patch that, you know, we all have across the back, so I need some advice on that. And Stephen, you're affected more than anybody, so certainly we want to hear from you.
Okay, Steve?
So, the basketball court is noisy. But of course, no fence you put up is going to take care of me on the second floor.
Right.
Furthermore, I find these fences really ugly. And
Thank
finally, I just landscaped the whole damn back there to have bushes that are going to grow up that will give me screening. So I actually have now come to peace with the chain link fence. And once my wooden fence came down, you know, yeah, I have to weed that section. But the problem of having two fences is quite real.
Right, so
but I will just say of course, the 12-foot or whatever would be just awful. But I frankly find these noise fences ugly. I don't think it would be effective. And I would like not to have one.
The black tennis court fence, Peter, is, I think,
Could be upwards of 12 to 15,
12 to 15,
Yeah.
and I have a wood, stockade fence going across the back, and I can still go out and see the field. So, I mean, I don't like this either. I feel like I'm in a prison yard, so it's not attractive to me either.
I just want to say, okay,
Russ.
so Russ and then Susan.
I'll tell you, I really object to these walls, okay? But before I get to why I object to them next to the highways, you can accomplish the same thing by planting hemlocks. And especially, I'm sure this lady in front of me will agree, is that it would look a lot prettier with hemlocks. And I, as a taxpayer of Watertown, would be willing to spend my tax money that enough hemlocks be planted behind these homes, so that will buffer the noise, and it looks much better. And you know what gets me on the highway? Those jerks that we have in Washington, okay? Someone makes a lot of money with this. Do you know that we've had the technology for 30 years that we can have an automobile hit a guardrail at high speed on a highway and it can slow the car down and the people will live? But instead of spending money on safety, we spend money on these noise walls. And the bottom line is, as far as this with the highways, look, the highway was there when you moved in there. That was your choice. This is ridiculous. And the last thing I really want to see these is around town. I'd rather pay for hemlocks than paying for these kind of fences.
Okay, thank you. Susan?
I was just gonna pass something around for everybody to see. It's not really, it's a beautiful wall, to be honest with you. It was done for a building down in Florida. and I'll just give you this, like 10 copies. The one that got chewed up in the machine, here, you can pass it around, and there's one for everybody. This is not an ugly wall. And you
Yeah, let me look
put
at that
trees
wall.
in front of it, honey. And it's for noise. I had another picture, but it got chewed up in the
Okay.
machine.
Thank you, Susan.
You're
So,
welcome.
Jim?
Yeah, so Jim Brudlard, Marion Road, I'm also in a butter, and I agree with Elodia. The biggest problem is the gap between the tennis court fence and our fences in our backyards. And I wouldn't be in favor of a noise reduction fence. I don't think that would be anything that I'm looking for. I think it would be too high and block out too much. I don't want to live in a backyard that I don't know what's going on behind my property, or in the park. So I'd rather have some kind of solution where we figure out where the line's going to be, we figure out how we're going to deal with it, whether it's plantings or partial retaining wall. And then the black fencing that's there now, I think is fine for what it does.
If I could just, before Peter, so we have the tennis court and basketball court with let's say it's 12-foot high black chain link fence, which we sort of need there. So then, I'm hearing from neighbors who live there, we have 3 of them right here. Yeah, they all, if you go there and you look, it's, Steve used to have a fence, and now he's got a new fence that goes along one side and sort of stops with this weird grade changes in the retaining wall. He actually can't put the rest of the fence in his backyard. Jim's got a fence that's actually, seems fairly new. It's tight against.
Well, it's almost 20 years old,
Okay,
but it's leaning.
It's sort of tight against it's close to the
Close.
black chain link fences you can get. Then Elodia's got a wooden fence, which is at one point it's really close to the fence, the other place is about 3.
Where the fence got moved. That's
So,
where the black chain link went in.
and then Will Twombly
He has
doesn't have a
nothing.
fence at all. And then his
And
fence.
Bill Ward does not have a fence.
And Bill, so I guess the real question is, from what I'm hearing, at least from the neighbors who are here, they don't want to have a 12-foot high solid wall. They like to be able to see the trees and everything there. But they want to have some privacy. So maybe, and again, what I'm hearing is there's a gap problem. So is the solution to keep the 12-foot high black chain link fence and do something that we can put a wooden stockade fence along for the neighbors who want it. Maybe some want it, maybe some don't. But instead of having it be a foot or two away from the black metal chain link fence, actually have it designed in a way that it could actually be bolted to the posts that are holding up the chain link.
Perfect.
And that way we eliminate the gap and all the junk that grows between, in that dead space between the two fences. Is that, from a technical standpoint, is that something that would work and keep everybody happy? And I'm just gonna throw that out there, and I'll let Peter talk.
And again, I don't want to ruin the love, because we've had a wonderful meeting. I've had my tennis program, had meetings with 40 people saying that the music in the mood, Glenn Miller, is too loud. I'm sorry, I've heard a lot of complaints by the neighbors on the tennis court side. Not everybody. And sometimes it's not, and no disrespect, but sometimes it's not always about the neighbors. Because I want to be able to have recreation programs and not worry about people complaining about bouncing balls. I think we settled the lights. I think the lights are going to be outstanding. I agree, the double spaces and all that got to be put away. It has to be cleaned up. I think a 12-foot wall would be nice. And I know some of the neighbors might not like it, but it would solve the issues that at least I'm facing as a director of recreation. I'm sorry, we get more complaints, not just by the music on the press box. We get complaints a lot. And I get calls at a lot of different times. The public has the cell number. And I'm sorry, at some point the committee has to take what the neighbors say, which we respect, and I do, and say, what's in the best interest in the long term? And I think on this wall, I could see on the other wall, we never really have a lot of problems. It's a different thing. But on that side, let the neighbors pick the fence, take away the metal fence, and I think it'd be nice, and I think it would grow on them. And it would give them their privacy. Because I go over there sometimes and
Peter, may I just ask a
Right,
question?
and that's all, and that's all I, feel, but I agree it needs to be cleaned up, the two fences and the junk fence down and so on and so forth, needs to be, cleared up. But I really feel that, I'd like the committee to consider, at least at that tennis court side, some type of barrier fence that's soundproof. Thank you.
I just need to ask, because I'm really confused, because I intimately know every neighbor on this street.
Yeah.
So, and I know none of us complain about bouncing tennis balls or the kids playing over there. So I'm not getting, who's giving you all this complaint?
The
that
basketballs, and we had a meeting on the music.
Well, the music is coming from the stadium.
No, the music that the tennis program held. That
That's
we had.
inappropriate. There's no amplified music there, and it is definitely loud. So that's a whole different story. If you're trying to do something to go back, that's a different story.
So the recreation department would like to run our programs like we like to run them. And we had a wonderful program that's taken a hit the past 2 years because we don't have Spirit Week, and it bothers me. So I agree. We try to make the neighbors happy, and I really respect that. At some point, the neighbors got to give a little bit too. And I think with the fencing, I think that would be a happy medium. But that's my thought. Thank you.
Okay, Steve?
We had this discussion. One, I don't think these soundproofing walls would be adequate. Two, when we had the discussion, we established that you had had music that didn't bother any of us for at least a year. And all we said was, go back to the system you had then. No one could figure out what the system was, but so help me. Sorry, I'll stop there.
Susan?
Music has never bothered me. I don't care what kind of music, I don't mind at all. I listen to the kids at the boombox from 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock, the night before our last meeting. What bothers me is the noise and the screaming at the top one. I can't stand it. The noise, the screaming, constantly the obscenities. And I'm not bothered by music whatsoever. So I don't know what you can do to solve that problem. They don't stop, morning, noon, and night, the kids.
Okay.
So,
So I guess, if I just ask a question, so if we're gonna have an 8-foot-high solid wall, like these soundproof barrier walls, do we also need to have, what do we do? I thought we needed 12-foot-high for the.
I don't know where 8 foot came from.
You said 8-foot-high solid walls, that's why I
I'm
was just.
sorry, I thought Glenn said that. That's the one thing. I would say it needs to be just as high as the fence, which is 12.
So 12.
Unless you had a combination.
So it would have to be, so you would want to put a 12-foot-high solid wall?
Never.
So can I just ask a question? So do we want to have this 12-foot solid wall for the express purpose of you being able to run a music program with the tennis program in Spirit Week a few times a year?
I just
mean, because I've never called you about the noise there, okay? I've been dealing with it for over 20 years. It's not a problem. It's not that big a problem. Basketball, that's a little different thing once in a while, but not every night. And I don't want a 12-foot solid wall in the back of my house. Sorry.
And I respect that. I'm just gonna ask the committee to talk about it and take a vote. That's all. I
John?
respect that.
Catherine.
Sorry, Catherine.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I live on Marion Road as well,
Sorry,
and I'm just a few houses down from Melodia towards that direction on that map. And we can certainly hear all the stuff in summer. It is very loud, even that far down. The other question I have was about a soundproofing wall. All the walls that I see along the highway, and I drive on 128 every day, so I see lots of them. They're very tall. They're much taller than 12 feet. They're more like 20 feet, like 25 feet. They're very tall. So is a 12-foot wall really going to help with noise? It's just a question.
To be honest, I've never put a solid soundproofing wall between a parking and a butter on any project in 80 projects, so I really don't know how well. I would think 12 feet, looking at the elevation you are, on a first floor, that yes, it would do some sound attenuation, but is it gonna come around from the opening? I couldn't tell you.
But, David.
My understanding is the sound doesn't really bend all that much. And if you've got wall between the source and the ear, it's going to do a lot. And if most of the sound is bouncing off of the ground, it's doesn't have to be very high. If you're lobbing overhead, it might have to be a little higher. But if you're going to put in a 12-foot wall, I don't think you need the fence as well. I think when you get a situation, as you've mentioned, of a fence and a wall or two fences or something, there's no way to maintain in between them, then you're going to get a lot of mess and invasive messes, and you certainly don't want that. I think also the one tends to perceive less noise when you don't see it. If there's, if you're bothered by the noise, you're going to hear it more when you see people bouncing around playing tennis. If there's screening there, you're not going to hear as much. The solution may be vegetation for those who object to noise.
We're mixing apples and oranges here. We are not talking about the sound of tennis balls, kids playing on the courts, etc. We are talking about Peter's desire for amplified music on the tennis courts during the summer. That music broke every law that we have in Massachusetts in terms of what it's doing. And I sent you all that information, as I did to Vinnie, as I did to Steve, as I did to Mike Driscoll. It's inappropriate, and it breaks the law. It's as simple as that, period.
Counselor, this is where, Elodie has done a nice job today, but she's not speaking for me.
No, I'm not
Okay.
speaking for you. I'm
So thank
speaking
you.
about the law, Peter. And
That's
nobody
fine.
wants to live in a prison yard, and that's what these things look
Fine.
like to those of us that live there.
So wait a minute, I think that me as a committee person has the opportunity to request of the committee to discuss it. Like we did, I have a suggestion, because I'm not a sound specialist, like we did with Musco, if the committee would want to talk about it, maybe they don't, I don't know. Maybe you bring in the person who builds these walls and maybe get some more information. I don't know, because I'm not, as Glenn said, he doesn't put a lot of in. But I don't know what the other people on the committee feel.
Tony?
Well, I do think there are areas that sound, and I know that Susan's has spoken about the problem she has with the sound. So, and David, I'm not an expert, but if you have, clearly you have some experience that sound doesn't go around, right? So that, what I don't want to rule out here is the use of sound barrier fences in other parts of the park. And then if we need to have some validation that they work, then maybe we should bring someone in to talk about them. But if there is something that there's areas that you could use soundproofing fence, and it would work for some abutters, then I think we need to at least be able to say it's a valid option. Now, I'm not, if most people, if Steve and others and Mary Monroe don't want it, well, that's fine. But, I don't want to rule it out. And if people feel like we can't rule it out because we don't have enough data, then I think we need to get some data, because we could use it at different points around the field.
Yeah, and I agree with Tony, but let's talk about the Marion Road side first,
Okay.
and then we'll talk about it, because I think it'd just be easier for us. Sure. So, fascinating discussion. How many people would want to have a 12-foot high solid wall across the entire length of their backyard? Well, I mean, okay.
Most of this I would love.
Okay,
Or brick.
so I guess, let me tell you, if my neighbor put a 12-foot high solid wall against, I would really be having a cow. Not that he would, but so, and there's a big difference between a 6-foot high wooden fence and a 12-foot high, sort of, some of these are concrete, or a 12-foot high wooden fence. So I guess the real question is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? In my mind, on that northern side, we have two things. We have the courts, which we need a 12-foot high wall to keep the walls in. Currently, we have black plastic-coated chain link fence, which seems to work well to serve the needs of the sports users, and it doesn't seem to bother any of the neighbors or anybody. Okay, I mean, that's true.
No replacement cost necessary.
But there is an issue that we have neighbors who have, there's some visual issues. So we have neighbors who want to have the wooden fence, which does, a wooden fence provide some noise attenuation. And again, to David J's point, you know, the visual and the audible are sort of intertwined. You tend to ignore what you can't hear. You tend to ignore the sounds of what you can't see. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than the vegetation. You could plant shrubs, and shrubs really don't provide any sound attenuation, but they do provide a visual attenuation. So, without making this too complicated, is the right solution, go back to my original thing, is keeping the 12-foot high chain link fence and making, formalizing, putting some, wooden, 6-foot high wooden wall, against the black chain link fence, so that we don't have that gap where weeds grow. Is that a solution that would make the abutters happy? Is that something that works for the town? And again, we don't, again, it's sort of an improved version of what's already there. Is that what we should, is that, for this particular Marion road stretch of the southerly stretch of fencing, is that sort of the best solution? So, Steve and then Ann.
I'd suggest that if, you've already heard from some neighbors, some would like to have some vegetation as a buffer, some would like to have a fence but not too tall a fence, some would like to have no visual barrier. I think it would be a mistake for us to have a hodgepodge of things on the town property dealing with individual preferences on their property. So I would suggest that we do the 12-foot chain link coated fence that deals with the ball issues and those types of things, keeping the property line secure and all that. And individual property owners, if they choose to put up a fence, or they choose to put up plantings, or they choose to put up a 12-foot, 18-foot tall fence, they can do that. If they want to provide a sound barrier, they can do
By
that.
zoning at 6 feet.
So, good point.
Okay.
But my point being that as a property owner, you can decide to put up a board-on-board fence if you want to provide a visual barrier or a sound barrier to some extent, and do that. And I think it'd be better if we try to be consistent.
I think what we really need is to clean up that area between the old black chain link and when they redid the field the last time. That's what's causing a lot of problems along that fence line. So.
Okay.
I agree with everything that Steve was saying and with what Elodia was saying. And what I was going to say, I think it's a very personal preference. And as abutters, we all deal with the fact that we have a town fence, that we have to deal with it. People deal with it different ways. With regard to the Marion Road residents, I haven't heard anyone complain about the actual town fence. They've complained about whatever problems are between the two fences.
And the slope.
And I think that even, Vinnie, to your suggestion about putting a stockade fence next to it, I would say everyone seems to be fine, the people who have spoken out here, with just the chain link fence, and then let them do what they want, whether it's shrubs, stockade, nothing, morning glories, crawling through it, whatever they want.
Yeah, and I just one thing, and I agree to that, but I think that the issue is, and again, Steve, let people do what they want on their property, but the reality is, the town fence is not at the property line, and there's a space between where the chain link fence is and where people's property line is. And my feeling is, rather than let's say, okay, well, you got to put the fence on your property, and that leaves a 18-inch gap where weeds grow, could we recommend to the town that we allow people to put their fence all the way against the chain link fence, so that, would be on town property, so that we don't have this, what appears to be problem area, which is the sort of the area where weeds grow. I mean, is that something that we can recommend?
I would suggest there's a variety of solutions, and yes, if the issue is that space between the property line and the fence, let's figure out a way to solve that. I
And
don't
Jerry
think-
Mee would like that,
I don't
Tony.
think, I don't think the solution is to put a second fence on the town property, just my opinion.
Tony?
It seems to me that I don't mind replacing the fence. Why don't we just put the same type of fence that's high enough for the balls and still chain linked fence, and just put it on the town property so that there is no space. I mean, if we're not talking about money here. Take it down, put it where it belongs, make it clear that this is town property, and that's private property, and if folks want to do something against that private property line, they can do that. So it seemed to me that would be the way to go, and if it eliminates the gap. It eliminates the gap. You have a chain link fence, the tennis balls don't go anywhere, and if people want to do different things, put plantings, put up a wall, they can. But let's get it off of, let's put the fence where our property ends, the town's property ends.
So again, just, so just to Steve's earlier point, Tony's point, so if the solution is to move the chain link fence, so it's actually on the town property line, and then whatever needs to be done, we put gravel or, something so that things don't grow there between that and where people can put their fence, would that then be the solution that, if Elodie wants a fence and Jim wants a fence and Will Twombly doesn't want a fence, that everybody can do what they want? And if Steve wants to put a wooden fence, he can put a wooden fence.
It won't work. So it's not just stuff growing. It's that if there's any space at all, leaves accumulate and you gradually get debris which rots. So actually, when DPW came and built that little retaining wall for me, and I have to admit I don't know whose property it's on, one of the things they said to me was, if you want, you can consider weaving something, those strips in and out of the chain link, or they said, we think probably it'd be okay to attach a fence to the chain link. So I guess what I'm trying to say is and even there, you're gonna have to get somebody to really do this, because you've got the crossbars, so it'd be a little tricky. But it seems to me if the town would be willing to allow people to really attach a fence to the chain link, if they want, they don't have to. I mean, you can build your fence back, you can put doors on, you can do all sorts of things, but I think that would help.
I'm just going to ask Glenn, so the idea of have the 12-foot chain link fence, attaching, I guess the real issue is, attaching it to the poles.
We've seen it before, but you can't imagine that it can't be designed in some way. You'd have to attach wooden posts you probably have to upsize the posts for the chain link, because you're adding weight and you're adding a wind load to the chain link fence, so it gets a little bit tricky and has to be detailed, but I don't see why it couldn't be.
Can I just ask just another technical question, if the committee indulges me? Would the alternative be somebody like Steve Kennedy wants to put a wooden stockade fence? The town says you can't attach it to our chain link fence, but he could have a fence contractor put a metal pole in on his property that then the wooden fence would be attached to, so it sort of bridges that gap between the two, and the metal poles could be right on the property line, basically.
You're gonna never be able to eliminate it.
There'll be a gap.
Point, what I would first do is I would probably put a concrete curb in along the back side of that tennis court, and I would extend the curb out so that anyone who builds a new fence, there's never going to be anything that grows. But you're never going to be able to eliminate long-term leaves and things getting in there. And there's no real good solution to that. You
you could lift the wood fence up enough so that you can get in there and,
Correct.
doesn't have to
So
necessarily.
maybe like 3 inches off
Yeah,
the
something
grade.
to allow you to get under it. So you got a little bit of a gap between the bottom of the wood fence and that concrete curb that I'm talking about. You maybe have a 6-inch space at the most between the two fences. And I say that just because that's the diameter. If you put it out footing in for the wood posts, you're gonna have that gap between the wood and the chain link.
So instead of the wooden fence going all the way to the ground, if it was 3 inches, stop 3 inches from the ground, any leaves that go in there, you would be able to clean them up from the bottom.
It's concrete.
With a concrete.
So that there's nothing that's
So
gonna
nothing
grow.
to grow. So I guess, I mean, just sort of talk about technical solutions, if that works. I know Elodie is the question.
Now, I've dealt with this town for this fencing issue now for 42 years. The town still doesn't know if what their present black fence is on their property or not. I find that a little bit crazy, given all the plans that keep being drawn up. So all I need to know is, this is your fence, it's on your property, and I would do exactly, I want to replace the fence, exactly what Glenn says, put my fences close, lift it up so I can get the rubble out, but I won't have that gap of 4 feet somewhere here. You move the fence, you keep moving the fence on me. So I placed my fence along it. So I agree with Glenn totally. It's simple, it's clean, and we're done. And where the land is sloping, where you have all that rubble, it was debris, and it was sloppily done, no offense to anybody in this room, it needs to be cleaned up, for God's sakes. They just threw it.
The
So-
concrete edge I'm talking about could actually become a retaining wall in the area where it needs to retain, where DPW built some kind of a wall. So that it could act as a retaining wall, and then when it gets flush, it just is a flush 6-inch concrete strip.
Okay, Susan?
Yeah, it's impossible to put a fence on top of a fence if you've got a stained fence. I have a white cedar stained fence, #1 cedar. You can't stain it if you're gonna join it to something.
No, we've moved beyond talking about adjoining it to another fence.
You're talking about adjoining it on my property.
No,
Can't do it.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet, just,
Oh, I'm sorry,
I
okay.
promise we'll,
Then one
let's,
question, okay, are you talking about replacing, hopefully, all the perimeter fencing around, like, down Orchard Street, down behind my property, 2 black would be really nice.
we're just trying
Not there
to
yet.
break it
Okay,
into
we're
chunks.
I'm trying to.
So we're gonna get there, so
there.
just hold on.
So
I'd like to make a motion then, that the committee, I would like to make a motion that we ask that the fence be put on the property line, on the town's property line, and that it be a black chain link coated 12-foot fence, but that it be on the property line, and that anybody wants to do anything on the other side of the property line, they can. But the fence goes down to the bottom of the ground, and it's our fence, and it's on our property, meaning town's property. And that's just, all we're talking about is just the space around Marion Road. That's the motion.
Will that allow for this concrete ledge?
Yeah,
You'll put the fence in the concrete?
Yeah, in that case, if we're redoing the fence, I would create like we did out at Victory Field. You've got that between the artificial turf and you've got
Yeah,
that big
with the concrete strip.
With the concrete strip
strips underneath the fence.
Along the butter side, we'd extend that concrete wide enough to make sure that gives them enough space if they put a footing in for a wood fence. The only other thing I would say is, you know, if the condition of that existing fence is okay.
It's fine.
You know, what is the real value to moving the fence? Because we can go in and we could add a concrete strip without having to move that fence or do any of that, and still do the exact same thing.
I think you need to come look, Glenn.
Because you want to get the exact property line.
Yeah,
And it's been a point. The other thing, please don't go on 12 foot. I like to, if you're going to not even consider my wall, thank you. At least, the fence might be higher than 12 feet, so I'd like to match the height of the fence on the backside.
The fence is perfect height where it is right now.
I'm not sure exactly what it is.
But it's perfect.
So I'll amend the motion to say that we move the fence to the, I still think we should move it to the property line, and include a cement border, but that the fence be moved to the property line, so the butters know exactly where the fence begins and where their property begins, or the town's property begins. That's the motion. Any
And
seconds?
cleanup of the mess.
I'll second.
Second, got a second.
Okay, any discussion?
I just have a question on the current size of the fence right now. It does the job in terms of tennis balls going into yards and things like that?
Back years ago, when I made all my suggestions, and who was, Steve Romanelli was my town councilor, and Tom Sullivan was the director of recreation, my suggestion for our side of the fence was a fence that would go up and then angled, which you can see if you know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean, because it would keep the tennis balls. We get tennis balls, but, you know, it's okay, all the dogs love them. The kids come over, they're nice, they come in, they can find them in my yard, but, you know, it would kind of contain tennis balls. But that does not bother me. If they come, they come. But the main thing is I have a 6x8 panels going across the back. It is when they move the fence again, now this gap was created and this garbage material of the junk needs to be cleaned up. And I can't move my fence because of all this rubble. And I went to Vinnie, I said, where's the town property line? Because they changed it on me several times now. Could we get it together? We've got all these plans, just give me the property.
Okay, I'm just asking the question,
Yeah.
for the current height of the
The
fence.
short answer is yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's
Okay,
fine.
Okay, so Steve, did you have something you want?
No.
And, okay. Steve Kennedy.
I really liked Glenn's idea,
We just said.
but if we're gonna have that apron, unless you're gonna build this concrete wall on my property, you're gonna have the fence back a little bit, because we wanted an apron that had some space between it and where you could put, where a butter could put their own fence.
Or the concrete will extend onto your property slightly. That's.
Right, but if you don't change the fence, if you put the fence right up against my property line, then the concrete is gonna extend further. And so I just assume you didn't move the fence. We don't need the fence moved if you put that concrete in.
Well, I think, you know, it depends.
Where it is.
I mean, if the fence is close, if the existing fence today is close enough to where the real town property line is, and we don't need to remove it, then we could just, as Glenn pointed out, we don't have to take it down and put a new one, it's fine. We could just fill in concrete underneath it. It would then, would go several inches, which, you know, it doesn't need to go that far, because you want to put your fence, you know, sort of as close to the town fence as possible.
So understand though, the abutters now would have concrete on their property.
Underneath.
This,
So
if we did this, they would have concrete on their property, and that's okay, an apron of concrete.
I want to know where the property line is, Tony, I really do.
So let's make this as a conceptual recommendation.
Okay.
We're gonna need to do some detailed drawings before it gets built, so that'll be, but I guess, you know, if this concept is gonna work on the southern side, we've got a motion, and so is everybody in favor of that? All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Not in favor of,
Okay, I'm trying to be as simple as possible. I want to know where the property line is. Is it on my property or is it on town property? Once that black fence is stable, right now, the rubble is there, it has to be addressed and cleaned up. I can take care, once I know that black fence is there, my fence is caving in because of what's going on now. So I know I have to replace the fence. But I would do it differently. I wouldn't put the concrete there. I would just dig down, put plastic, put gravel and weed kill. That's what I would do to protect that area to keep things from growing up. So I don't know. I just think I don't have enough information because I don't even know where the hell this damn fence sits right now.
I think we're gonna assume that.
And I have a different situation than other people.
So the town is gonna put, either keep the existing or put a new 12 fence to match existing height, because we don't know if it's 12 feet, but or whatever it is, on the property line. And then for those neighbors who want, you know, us to fill in underneath our fence with concrete, so if they put their fence, there's nothing growing underneath it. If people don't want anything there, we don't need to put anything there. It would be up to the individual property owner what they want us to do along the property line. And I think that's,
everybody has their own personal preference. But I think what we want to avoid is, for those neighbors who have a problem with it, we want to avoid a place, where debris is going to accumulate or weeds are going to grow between the two fences. And if filling that in with a little bit of concrete solves that problem for one neighbor, and another neighbor says, no, I don't want it, I'm just going to put mulch and just, I'll be happy with it, then that's fine. It's a personal preference. But from the town side, it's a uniform 12-foot high black fence.
When I did speak to Jerry about this, because he knows about it, he said, as far as I'm concerned, what he wants the town fence to be there, and he said, we'll clean up the mess that we made, Elodia, and anything else is yours, and I'm done. Because obviously, we can't maintain it, we don't want to maintain it. I don't care if it's a foot, if you get a foot more, I don't care. He just wants it done. So I have no problem, Jerry and I have no problem, we can straighten it all out, we just need to figure this thing out. And if you say the fence is a foot this way, do we need to spend all this money to rebuild a whole new fence? It would seem a little nonsensical to me. Let's just straighten out the problem, establish the back line. That's my thing. We don't have enough information.
I don't remember what the motion was.
Yeah.
The motion was that the fence be moved to be on the town property line, and that there be an apron of cement that extends onto the property of the abutters in order for them to decide whether they want to put a fence there, and if they want to put a fence there, so that there's no vegetation that would grow up. Now, I'll amend the motion if you want to say that the fence gets put on property line, and that the cement apron would be used depending on each butter's preference. But that the fence sits on the property line.
Thank you.
That's what you're looking for.
And I agree, but I don't think the town should bear the cost of putting cement on somebody's private property. As a matter of fact, I don't think it's legal to do so. So I would just have, move the fence line, and if somebody wants to pour some cement, if the neighbors want to pour cement, let the neighbors pour cement, and let them take care of it. I don't think the contractor say, okay, house number 1 has cement, house number 2 no cement, 3 and 4 has cement, 5 doesn't have cement. Just put the fence on the property line and let the neighbors do what they want.
Part of the problem you had though, Peter, is the land does slope, and when they did the tennis courts, they didn't put, for lack of a better word, a curb along the back so to contain the tennis court material. So that's, maybe
They should clean that up for you.
right, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't need this concrete. We need containment of this thing, whatever you want.
So maybe this clarifies that because there is a grade change, this goes back to the retaining motion, maybe, and I do understand the issue about putting, constructing public works on private property.
I agree with you.
Maybe what we're really saying is along the property line is a cement curb.
That's what I've been saying.
Okay,
A
well, we
cement-
weren't understanding that.
A
Glenn.
cement curb, say 4 inches of cement right up against the property line, and then the fence pole is not actually on the property line.
I see what you're saying.
It's on
Okay.
the back end of this curb, and then the paving of the court goes up to the curb.
Because this acts as this really contains the pavement and everything. It protects the pavement long term from the
Yes,
edge of the
okay.
tennis courts from cracking and breaking up.
So
So is the pole
if I had a
beside
whiteboard, I would draw, if you get a butter's property here, you got a curb that say comes up about, say, this high, it's about 4 inches wide, concrete, on the town property, against the property line. And then if that curb is sitting here, the fence pole would then be on the town side of
On
the
the
curb.
town side.
Yes.
Okay.
And then, so now there's a place with this concrete curb where nothing is gonna grow on it. And then the neighbors, if they choose to put a fence, they could put their fence post up against the edge of that curb.
So
on
the edge
their
of the
side.
curb is where the property line is.
So the face of the curb becomes the property.
Property line. Okay, I see
So
what you're saying.
Something like this, correct?
The face of the curb
Yeah,
becomes
because
the
the curb
property.
would actually go.
Does that make sense?
Sure. The curb's actually.
So that makes-
post is
so
actually
now-
centered on this
yeah,
curb.
so that's-
The curb would be on the edge of the property.
So if you think about the face of the curb is on the property line. So you can put your fence post
Right next to the curb.
right next to the curb, and then the town fence post is black chain link fence is actually on the town side of this curb. So this 4-inch curb of concrete
Is on the property, it's not on the.
is on the town
It's on
property,
the
but
town
it's
property.
between the two fences.
Okay, so I would make a motion then that we we install an apron where the cement is on the property, the end of it is on is the property line for the town. And then our fence sits on the inside of the cement apron.
Well, it's contained in the apron. I wouldn't even call this an apron.
Oh,
I
well,
call it a footing.
a footing. A footing.
Yeah,
Curb, I call it.
let's call it a curb, for
Curb,
lack of a better
Yeah.
term. But at least we know in the committee,
Yes.
we'll clean up the minutes or this.
And then we'll clean up the mess.
We'll clean up the minutes, so this will sound a lot better, so. Okay, so that,
Yes.
all in favor?
Yes, yes.
Opposed? Okay,
I mean,
wow.
Steve?
Just one comment. You might look at this, the retaining wall that DPW built is actually quite pretty. I mean, it's a set of bricks, blocks. Anyway, it's quite nice, and if you might consider looking at it in terms of whatever this what do we call, footing,
Curb.
Footing.
whatever it's gonna be.
Well, we might need it, because we might have to
So,
slow.
all right, so this is a conceptual thing.
This is just a comment.
Once the
on
construction
the side.
drawings are done, this will be fleshed out in detail. George was just in the hallway reminding me we have to be out of here at 10.
10.
Thank you, George.
Because it's past Peter's bedtime, because he gets up really early. Really quick, if we could talk about the easterly side.
Let's see, it's that
That's this side here.
Catherine Road.
Catherine Road. I don't think we could do that quickly.
So right now, that does not need a 12-foot high fence. And in fact, I would say, I would include this little piece here too, because beyond the limit of the courts.
It is lower there right now.
It is lower.
So would the appropriate thing there be the 6-foot high metal fabric, plastic coated chain link fence set on the inside of the town side of the wall? So, if that's, and then the similar situation would be true if individual property owners wanted to put a wooden stockade fence on their property, which would be on their side of the retaining wall. They could certainly do that, or they could leave it open. But at least from the town side, if we're gonna have a retaining wall that's gonna be rebuilt, and we've agreed that the fence is gonna be on the inside, the town side of the edge of the wall, instead of currently the way it is with the post in the wall.
The water.
Does that make sense? And does that make sense to have just a plastic, the black plastic coated chain link fence?
I think it's better than what's there now.
At the DPW, they put in, it's a black coated chain link fence, but they did a little fancier piece on each side of the wood. Did you notice that by chance? It's got, it's more meshy.
Slats.
What is it called?
I don't know if you're looking at the
It's
slats.
meshy. It's more meshy. It's got more of an enclosure.
So this is, well, this would be, I'm just throwing that out there. And again, I know Mrs. Felina, Susan Felina has an issue with the tot lot. But let's consider that, at least for the majority of that. Let's talk about that all the way down up to the top lot area. Is the committee comfortable with that fence treatment there?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Council, why are we gonna stop it at the Felino household?
Well, because the Felinos had some specific issues about noise, and we may want to just talk about that as a separate discussion. So let's talk about it just up, so two things. We could say, let's just do that the entire way, all the way up to Orchard Street, or we may want to do something different, a different kind of fence treatment at the top lot. But let's, for the sake of the lateness of the hour, if we can all agree that we're happy with that fence treatment from the fence, the edge of the 12-foot fence here at the tennis courts, all the way down to the fence at the tot lot.
Are you happy with it?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm, like I said, I'm fine with what's there now, and I think the black coated will be, it'll be nicer than what's there
And
now.
it'll be inside the wall.
And it'll be inside the wall on the Victory Field side,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
I think, I think my property is the only one, and I'm thinking after the Felinos, as you get to the, actually where Catherine Road bends, the wall, I think a few doors down from me is actually very high.
It's about 4 or 5 feet high.
Right, it's about, so that's almost their wall, do you know what I'm saying? When it gets to my house, my neighbor, I think even her wall is probably 3, like there's a slope from my property down to hers. So on my property, the wall goes from being, I don't know, maybe 2 feet to 0. So I think really, and then my neighbors on the other side, they do have a stockade fence against it on their own side, or when we have those awful bushes. So I think that it's fine for me.
So,
I think I'm the only one really
agree.
affected.
I think you have the same issue though there, Vinnie, because I saw one of the neighbors, I don't think it was your house, trying to cut the kudzu, lack of a better word, all that mess that grows there. It's an invasive, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that should be cleaned out as well before this new fence goes in.
that's gonna have to be
It will
done
have to be.
when the retaining wall's
Yeah.
rebuilt,
Okay.
because it's actually
It's in the
growing
walls.
through the wall,
Right.
and it's causing the stone in the wall to come
Okay.
apart.
And through the fence too, it's
So
everywhere.
let's just, when the
Yeah.
retaining wall is rebuilt, all that invasive growth will be.
Okay, great.
Can I just ask a question?
Peter.
When 6 or 8 feet, does it matter in that situation?
No, I wouldn't think so.
I think the fence currently is 6 feet today,
Yeah.
it appears to
Okay.
be 6 feet,
It's
so.
7. The one down this way,
Yeah.
I measured it because our fence is broken, so I had to measure it. Got broken from the tree.
Do you have any issues, Ann, with the fencing, with kids going over them or anything like that? Is there any issues?
One child.
Besides your own son?
He can go over whenever he wants. I think he's on to other issues. But we had one person try to jump over the fence, and my husband got him, and we've never had an issue. So no, I don't have any issue.
Okay,
That
that's
was
6
my-
feet, 8 feet, it doesn't matter? Okay.
I mean, that was my own question, when everybody says 1 through 3 scat and they're running away from the cops, do they hop over the fence? I'm just, not that that ever happened.
One interesting detail, it might not matter or not, but with a 6-foot fence, you don't need a mid-rail. With an 8-foot fence, you
Do.
put a
okay.
mid-rail.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's better, sometimes it's not. A mid-rail sometimes gives kids a footing to get up the fence.
I don't think, there's no mid-rail there now. So,
So let's stick with 6 feet.
Fine.
As, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So, before we do that, before we go to the top lot, I just want to do two things. So, the fence along Orchard Street, we got a 4-foot-high fence here along Orchard Street. I think there's a 4-foot-high fence along the edge of the track. And we got a 4-foot-long fence, 4-foot-high fence. Is it 4 feet or 39 inches?
Should, I would say 4 looking at it, but I haven't measured it exactly.
So let's say 4. So, do we want to maintain that fencing that we currently have today?
Yes. I'm sorry, you
And-
said
and-
I can see.
So it would be
You're talking about Orchard Street?
all along Orchard Street. It comes up, it goes along the edge of the driveway. And then it comes up here and it comes along the sprint track. And it's got various gates and things in it. So it's it's in different, the Orchard Street is actually in fairly bad shape. So would our recommendation be to replace that with new
Black
4-foot-high, black fabric coated chain link fence?
yeah.
With appropriate gates, because I get a lot of
To be
questions about
determined.
gates, about different types of gates, and it's not, there should be more gates with different places or different styles of gates. But before we get into discussion about gates, should we put that fence in there to replace, upgrade it with just a new version of black plastic?
I guess, Councilor, I'm sorry, I feel rushed, but I don't think we should rush. When we did this 3.5 years ago, that front, we talked about the big Victory gate. We talked about more of an iron type gate in the front to make it a little more appealing. So I think if we're gonna be consistent, we're gonna be in front of, I know not Marion Road, but a nice Victory Field, and that front should be something similar to the main gate, I would think. You know, what do you call those, black?
Picket, like the steel picket.
Black
yeah.
picket, you
And
know.
also, they're talking about.
That could be wrought iron. It's
Well,
vinyl though, they think it's vinyl.
It's almost similar to the double gate we have to the opening. Anyway, a nicer gate console.
That's
I
nice.
would think that it might be nice
I
to
think you might
put
want to do
this.
something else in the shared use area too. If we're trying to dress that up with different amenities, some kind of a nicer fence than chain link, at least along that, through that section, would probably be something.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, I
then,
didn't hear you. What would be a nice?
A decorative fence instead of chain link. If, you know, in the area where we're talking about the shared use space and trying to make it a nice, you know, amenity for the space.
Sounds, on Orchard.
So,
10 to 10, can we get samples and look at this next time? Because we don't know what we're talking about.
because, right, I might concur. The other thing is, on the other side, by the other side with the sprint track, you know, we don't really know what that area looks like, so I'm kinda, how do we fence an area, we don't know what really, it's there, you know,
To do some stuff there.
okay, so let's,
I agree.
it's nice, 10 to 10, we agree with that.
so do we want to look at something other than chain link fences?
Yes.
Could our decision be, could somebody come back and give us some examples of what that fence material would be? Just so-
Black though. Let's
We
be
can
visually
we'll
consistent.
send over something like this. We'll
Great.
Put a few options of a little bit nicer decorative fencing.
Okay, so that, for next meeting.
Video.
Next week.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Yes, I would.
You got my
In
vote,
addition,
yeah.
perhaps around the gates, I don't know, whether or not we need fencing all along Orchard Street, or whether you want to put it occasionally in certain areas, either different type of, I'm sorry, with either some, particularly around the gates, whether you want to have a wider area where you have some plantings, and then pick up the whatever fencing. I don't know, I'm just phrasing it as an,
I wouldn't-
at least to discuss it.
I think you need fencing along all, you've got too many little kids.
Too many
coming in and
kids.
around, you
Yep.
know,
No,
kids-
you-
Little kids could wander, if there's any chance they can just wander around onto Orchard Street, get away
Right.
from the parents are walking, who knows?
Some shrubbery functions better than fencing.
You could plant it, but you need the fence for
I mean,
something. It's too crazy over there.
So let's wait till the next time, we'll see some samples. In the 7 minutes that are left, what do we want to do with the tot lot fence along the east of the property? Is that an area, and again, this becomes I guess the fence there is a real problem. We've got the town chain link fence, we've got outriggers of steel braces that stick out like 2 or 3 feet that actually brace the fence up because it's tipped over. That fence there is actually, it's higher than the rest of the, is that an area, and I'm gonna ask Susan Felino, who lives there, would you like the town to install something like one of these soundproof fences there? Or,
Think about it.
and I know you have a fence on your side of the property.
We do, and we can't maintain it because it's so close to the chain link. It's impossible, it broke into the tree this past year.
So the 2 options is we continue the chain link fence from everybody's house and another, all the way down to Orchard Street, and you continue to have your fence and your shrubs on your side of the property. Or we stop the chain link fence at the beginning of the tot lot, and then we do 12-foot high wooden fence that's soundproof that protects you from all the noise of the tot line. So look, those are 2 options. There could be other options, but I'm just gonna throw those out there, and we're not gonna be able to decide tonight. What I would like is, we'll have to ultimately put this on the agenda for the next meeting, but I would like the committee to think about those 2 options and perhaps another option, and we'll come back and we'll decide at the next meeting what we're gonna do with that section of the fence. Is the committee okay with that? Yeah.
Okay, may I ask one question? I know that many of the parents have asked for different landscaping over there, so that there would maybe be some kind of grass area or more shade trees. So if we're going to landscape that area differently, how would that affect this fencing business? You know, I'm just,
Yeah.
I mean, this
So,
is.
so I do think, I know.
Keep getting emails.
So we did, and so I think we need the fence, and decide we're gonna do the fence first, and then
Okay,
we'll
I
visit.
just wanna
Then
make
we'll
sure.
visit what we need to do with the landscaping,
Okay.
planting trees and grass and whatever other landscaping things we wanna do. But I don't think, you know, tonight, we're not gonna make a decision, so let's hold that as a placeholder, and let's do some more research and come back to the next meeting prepared to make a decision. Tony?
I agree with you, Counselor. I just want to, I'm looking at the agenda for the next meeting. So we've done great that we did A and B, and there's a lot to A and B. But C is are we just moving C down?
I recommend to move C down, yeah.
Just move it down. So we'll pick up, next week, or next meeting, we'll pick up with other equipment, fixtures, landscaping, amenities, which is a really important discussion, and one that the community's been, you know, I mean, we've done most of the athletic stuff, so maybe now we gotta think a little bit on the other side of it, to make it more park-like. And then so we'll move C down, and then we'll deal with the lighting hopefully next week too, next time.
I'm sorry, yeah, that's just the way it is. We're committed to do it.
Well, I think it's an important discussion, this one.
So, and again, I throw that out there to the public who are both here and at home, that, you know, if you have specific issues about specific landscape and specific amenities, you know, feel free to put it in writing and send it to us so we have time to think about it, but, you know, sooner than later, because the sooner we have it, the more time we have to think about it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank the committee because it seemed like tonight was very productive to me.
Motion to adjourn? All in favor?
Aye.
Council, the next meeting.
October 3rd.